Cool. Okay. So whenever you're ready, Rose. Okay, Rose, are we live? Fantastic. Excellent. So I was waiting for the countdown of the fingers. Usually we do a 3, 2, 1. So yeah. I didn't see it. Anyway, fantastic. Thank you very much, everybody, for dialing into session 7 of 8 sessions that we've got for this year's Responsible Raw Materials Conference, focusing on the role of mining within the just transition. Now, this, of course, means many different things to many different people. And over the course of the last 6 sessions, we have had fantastic dialogue, fantastic debate and conversation, a lot of agreement actually, around what all of this means and what do we actually need to do about it. Now, I'm really excited because, well, on one hand, it's disappointing because one of our fabulous speakers this afternoon has had to drop out because they're not very well. However, we have brought to the fore the fantastic Pauline Cook, who is going to step into the breach. And she has not only taken part in all of the last 6 sessions, but she was also with us a couple of weeks ago at another conference during which we discussed things like the role of geoscience within the energy transition. So there was a little bit of overlap there. So Pauline is doing us a massive, massive honor of coming and joining us here this afternoon to help us really try to pull together some of what we've heard over the course of the last week. So I know that Pauline has a number of thoughts that she wants to share with us. However, before we get to the fabulous Pauline, just a reminder to everybody, all of the information that we're looking at the moment is, of course, on the website. And the website, I'm sure that Rose will pop the website details into the chat box at the moment. And so the website, and I'm just going to go to this now so that you can all see. So if you go to the website, here is the main starter web page. Go to the 2022 conference. If you want to watch everything live on YouTube, there is the button. Click on that and you will be able to go and see everything happening live, including our little lovely starting agenda earlier on just now. If we scroll down, you can find the agenda for this afternoon, which is fantastic, and then click on the little abstracts button. And this is the important bit, because here you will see we've already uploaded lots and lots of the videos from the past week. So if somebody refers to a talk that was given earlier on this week, please do go and feel free to go and take a little look at all of this that's coming together. So for example, on Tuesday in the second session we ran on that day, so that was session 3, we did a burst the bubble session. And so here's the video from that session itself. And in this burst the bubble session, we got 3 individuals who know nothing about mining. Well, they don't necessarily know that they know nothing about mining, but they certainly have an opinion on it. And so we heard from them, what is their opinion on mining? And there's some reflections from Ruth Allington with regards to what does she feel she had heard as somebody from the mining sector, what had she heard? Also, with regards to what we have in here are all the panel sessions from each day. And then as well, where somebody has sent through an abstract, we've loaded that on as well. So here's Ludovine. Ludovine kicked off the conference all the way back on Monday. You can see here, here's Ludovine's abstract with regards to what she was talking about, one of the main diagrams she spoke to, the actual PDF, the slide deck that she used, and then the actual video as well. So it's a really nice resource that is coming together here on the website. Also, the final aspect of what we've got here is if you click on learning material, there's a whole load of lovely links, and we keep adding to these as well. So those of you who are sharing links with us, we are adding them into this webpage. So it's becoming a really good resource for all the teaching materials, different careers, information and advice, all of this kind of stuff, which is brilliant. The final thing, yes, I realize what I've done there, is if you click on the previous events button, this is where you'll be able to go to things like the Geoscience and Energy Transition discussion meeting, which was held approximately 10 days ago. It was a hybrid conference, so some people were there in person, some people dialed in online, and within this you'll be able to see all of the abstracts, and then also as well the full event recording is already up online as well. Now I say this because I anticipate that some of the things that Pauline might bring into the discussion may well be drawn from this meeting. So there we go, Pauline, I have referenced this for you already. Fantastic. Okay, so lots of lovely information there available for you online, which is brilliant, and keep all the comments coming. Okay, we've already this week, we've slotted in at least 2 extra speakers because people said, hey, what that person said made me think of this person, and you really need to get them in on the discussion. So we've managed to be dynamic and flexible enough to bring different people into the room. We've also been reaching out to different groups who perhaps aren't represented in the conference at the moment, because of course the whole purpose of this dialogue that we're setting up here is to bring all of the different players who have got something to do with the materials space. So for example, people who spend their lives working in mining, people who spend their lives working on the regulation side of it. What about the investment side of it? What about the specialist consulting side? What about the anti-mining side? What about the pro-mining side? All of these different groups coming together, including fabulous academics. And then, to be honest, my mum, who has been dialing in quite a lot this week. So mum, if you're there, a big hello to you. Fantastic. Everyone's waving. Absolutely glorious. So lots of lovely information for you there online. But what I'd like to do now is I'm just going to invite our fabulous speakers from this afternoon to turn on their cameras if they can. We will reintroduce them at the beginning of each of their sessions, but I'm just going to invite them to say a little bit of a hello, and also what it is that they are going to be talking about, or just a point of interest this afternoon. So Val, if I come to yourself first, because Val's going to be helping us to summarize at the end of the session. So I'm going to bring you in now. Val, do you want to say hello to everybody? And then I'll go to Pauline.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm really excited to be here. I've had the opportunity to check in throughout the week and see some of the amazing discussions. So really excited to be a part of it. Valerie Malte, I work with Core Mining. We're a silver and gold extraction company, and we work in Canada and the United States and Mexico. So mostly focused in the Americas. I'm their corporate environmental manager, and I feel very fortunate in my role to be able to work with the various departments, and we're, I'm excited to say that we're working even more closely with the financial group, which is part of where we're going as an industry in terms of being able to try to quantify some of the impacts. So happy to be here, and I'll look forward to being a part of the panel later on. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Val. Fantastic. Pauline, do you want to say hello to everybody? And then we'll go to Miguel.
Hi everybody. You can see from my little name badge that I'm part of Keele University now, but before I came to Keele doing full-time teaching, I spent 25 years in engineering consultancy. So I qualified as an engineering geologist back in the heady days of 1991, so I've been around a bit. And I'm currently at Keele University. I kind of sit outside the main geology department there because I teach in the foundation years. So we're looking at sort of A-level teaching with students who, for all sorts of different reasons, can't access their degrees straight away. So gives you a bit of background.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much, Pauline. And talking about background, loving the dinosaurs over your shoulder. Absolutely glorious. Miguel, how about yourself? And then we'll go to Stewart.
Oh, thank you. I am a lawyer and have an MBA. In the past, I am former Minister of Energy and Mines. I am Vice Minister of Mines of Peru. And I had experience in mining sector. I worked in several mining companies, and the last my experience is in Goldfields. I'm Vice President of Corporate Affairs Sustainable Development of Las Americas in Peru and Chile. And I am very happy to share my lesson learned about the corporate affairs and social license to operate and other important topics around to the how the mining is is a work to align of the developers of the communities of the countries. No? Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Miguel. It's so good to have you here with us. Brilliant. Stewart, do you want to say hello to everybody? And then we'll go to Michael.
Good morning, good evening, everyone. I'm speaking to you from Vancouver, so some slight time zone issues there. My name is Stewart Mccracken. I joined Tech Resources in 2020, beginning of 2020, a very interesting time to join a company, as the VP of Exploration and Geoscience. What's interesting for me as a geoscientist, geologist by background, to come into an organization like Tech that is really thinking about how it moves from where it is now. Obviously a very diverse company with interest in some carbon industries into the new world. So today, yeah, interested to hear what people think, but also talk to how we're bringing communities on board with what we do and trying to make sure we are always listening to what our stakeholders want. So great to be here today.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Stuart. Brilliant. Michael, do you want to say hello to everybody? And then we'll go to Ludovine.
Sure. Hello. I'm sitting in Toronto, Canada at the moment. I'm coming at things here and joining the panel as a capital markets and derivatives practitioner, 20 plus years in global capital derivative debt markets, looking after corporate clients, institutional investors, the interbank market, and central bankers. Recently did a master's at the Monk School of Global Affairs, and yes, it's that Monk, where my master's research focused on conflict risk in the mining sector. And I recently held the position of Director of Research, Lead Analyst, Senior Analyst, ESG Risk Ratings for Sustainalytics, covering the mining, the steel, and the forestry sectors. So I'll be bringing a little bit of that insider view on ESG ratings. And then maybe just the final piece of the mosaic is I also sit on the User Advisory Committee for the Accounting Standards Board in Canada. They're the ones, they're the IFRS member representative here, and also the ones behind the nascent ISSB that was introduced at COP26. So also have that sort of accounting aspect or staying in front of the accounting discussions. So, and I'll be talking about that, the thread of ESG ratings to the financials. Where's the F in ESG ratings?
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Michael. Lovely Ludovine. Do you want to say hello to everybody? And then we'll go to Rose.
Hi, everyone. I am so looking forward to all these talks. So my name is Ludovine Voeters. I'm a governance and policy and strategy advisor for mining companies and investors. And delighted to be sharing all of these discussions today. So looking forward to it. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ludovine. And Rose, do you want to say hello?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. I'm Rose. I am the other part of Responsible Raw Materials. So while Sarah has the energy to host the whole thing, I do not, and sit behind the scenes trying to keep everything ticking over. I am a geologist by background. Oh, thank you, Ludovine. Thank you. I am a geologist by background and now work at Satala doing environmental sustainability kind of stuff. And I'm really looking forward to this afternoon because I think we've got an awesome group. So I'll let Sarah crack on.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Rose. Fantastic. So as Rose mentioned and Ludovine mentioned, and all of you mentioned, we've got a fantastic lineup for this afternoon. Really exciting discussions. As always, for all of you who are watching on YouTube, please do feel free to put your comments into the chat. We'll bring them into the discussion. All of you who are watching on Zoom, find that little chat button, make sure it's open, post lots of comments, links, ideas, concerns, etc. And again, we'll bring those into the discussion as well. If you want to use the Q&A button instead, that's totally fine, totally up to you. Feel free to go mad on Twitter, on TikTok, on LinkedIn. We don't have a Facebook profile, but I think that's because we just sort of run out of steam by the time we've done the TikTok one, which I still don't understand, but I will do one day. So with all of this, the whole purpose of what we're doing here all of this week is to bring together those diverse perspectives to say, okay, so How do we make sure that mining is as responsible as possible? And how do we also make sure that we are one of those really positive parts in unlocking this energy transition that we're all having to go through, or we will certainly have to go through over the next few years? So what is the role of us? What can I do? What can I bring to the table? And we've heard brilliant ideas over the last 6 sessions, and what I could do now is be really mean and give my thoughts on it, but I think that actually Pauline's going to do a better job than me. So yeah, no, definitely. So what I'm going to actually do is suggest that we go straight into our first session of this afternoon, which means that we're running a little bit early, but I don't think that's a bad thing because we've got such fabulous material. Let's get started a bit early anyway. So the lovely Pauline, who has just introduced herself, if you would like to magically come to our virtual stage, which by the way requires you to do absolutely nothing because Rose will click the right buttons, which is glorious. If you want to come to our virtual stage and join me in a little conversation about what you've heard over the last few days. So Pauline, over to your lovely self.
Thank you. I think I want to start with the Oscar speech. So if I get a bit too emotional, just jump in there to pull me off, hike me off, because I just want to say thank you. I'm really grateful for this conference. I've never been to anything quite like this, just with so much material. I've been scribbling, as many people have said, I've been sitting here scribbling notes. And at the same time, as I'm really interested in it personally, but also from a teaching perspective, I have other bits of paper with little notes on that say, right, go and look at this, go and listen to this again. And all the time, every organization, as they come on and talk, I've got my web browser open, and I don't know how many, it's got about 30 pages open on it at the moment. And that's a fraction of the ones that have been open. So I've been going onto your website. So I've been downloading documents and putting them all in this big stash. How I'm actually going to assimilate all that information and make some sense of it, I have no idea. But it's just amazing. And I think just I put out there on the chat how many students we have, because I think as students, you have no idea how valuable it is to be able to come to something like this for free. It's like, you know, the price of training and conferences and stuff like that. When I was in consultancy, we rarely went anywhere for training because there was never the budget, because the budget has got to come off the bills that we send the clients. So why would we be, you know, going over budget so that you can go, as they would call it, ridey-pidies. I think that might be a Stokeism, but that was the way it was seen. So I'm just like, the years and years of experience that have been showcased this week, it's like, you know, it really is amazing. Absolutely amazing. So I want to thank you guys for doing all this, and all the speakers for coming on, for giving up their time to come and do this is amazing. And you've mentioned the Jolstock conference. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for that Jolstock conference. And again, you guys sponsored that as well, didn't you? So I was able to attend that for free. It was the culmination of a series of conferences. So I started going all about issues to do with the energy transition. So I started doing that last year. And as we got closer to this one, I was just thinking, oh no, is it going to be back face to face? And probably then inaccessible. And then I was thinking, oh no, because although I have a little bit of budget for training now in academia, unfortunately there was a mix-up because they changed the accounting system last year, that my claim for last year's training actually got taken out of this year's money. So I've got no budget this year for training. So it's like, I so wanted to be at that conference, and I was like, I was prepared to pay out of my own pocket to go to it because I so wanted to be to it. And then miraculously, when I went on to book my seat, it's like, it was free. I was like, thank you. So, and I know that's down to you guys as well, because you sponsored it. So thank you for making that provision. That's brilliant. And also the way that you did that conference, I just loved it. As an external, as a person being online, when we first went into lockdown, the number of meetings I went to, and I tend to go to meetings a bit early because I just like to kind of be there and, you know, spy out whether there's any free, you know, is there coffee or tea there, or should I've bought my own, etc., all that sort of thing. But it seemed that once we went electronic, everybody just sat there and didn't say anything, apart from me. So I was always the idiot that started talking to people and saying, hi, who are you, where did you come from and stuff. And everybody's like, why is she speaking? It's not her meeting. She's not chairing this meeting. Why is she speaking? So for those of you that weren't able to be at it, basically Sarah, for all of us who were online, Sarah hosted us for 2 days solid, opening up, was it about half an hour, even 3/4 of an hour before the first talk session, all the way through lunch, the lunch break when everyone else disappeared. She stayed online. And every break time, we just had, it was like this lovely little homely hub where we would come and sit, and Sarah would talk to us, and she started grabbing us in to chat. And I think we were actually providing the entertainment for people who were eating that, who'd come back into the room, because we were on the thing. So huge thank you to all of this for doing it, and I really hope that you do it again, because I want to come again. I really do. And I said when we were having a little chat earlier about this, I said to Sarah, I really don't know what I'm going to do next week. I'm going to really miss you all, because it has just been really lovely. We talk a lot about, well, all of you guys have been talking a lot about community, and it just strikes me, I feel completely part of this community that you have built this week. And I'm like, we ought to do something with that. Because for me, certainly the encouragement, the support that I can see, the relationships that have been built over years and years and years, I'm like, some of these things that we've been talking about, and I love Ludovine's call for action. I'm like, sometimes when I look at the way things are, I'm like, as a child that grew up through the 80s, I was like, what happened? Where did we get so passive? Because when you look at the 80s, it's like protesting, you know, the Greenham Common women, all of the miners' strike, all of this stuff. I'm like, we were passionate about stuff. People, you know, people took to the streets on a regular basis. Whether that's a good thing or not, I wouldn't like to say. But I'm like, where did we just start accepting everything that happens? And, you know, they tell us, oh, this is what the consumer wants. And I'm like, nobody's asking me what I want. This isn't what I want. I remember doing the quiz, the Friends of the Earth quiz about microplastics. It was like 10 questions, and you had to say which item you felt or you thought had plastic in. I didn't really know. I just thought, right, what of the objects do I think should not have plastic in it, because I cannot think of any good reason why it would. And those were the things that I picked, and I got 10 out of 10. And it was one of those moments, you know, when you're just like, oh, when. Another moment like that was when I discovered that all this plastic that I've been faithfully putting in my recycling for years, for decades, I've been recycling, and it was all going to China. I was just, was absolutely gutted, because I'm like, how can that be, you know, the way forward? It just isn't. I was trying to work out, I was really privileged that I got to do geology at Sixth Form College. So I came to it quite early. It changed my life. I won't go into that story, but it certainly changed the direction that I was going in. And this week I've been trying to think, what was my first love? Because I don't know if it was the rocks or the mining. Because when I was a kid, I really liked stone circles. And I realize now it was because of the stone. It was the rock that I really liked. But mining, I don't know, there's just something about mining and historic mining and just the whole thing. So I almost went to Imperial to do the mining geology degree. That was my first. We could apply to university and Polytechnic there, so I was sneaky. So I had 2 offers in each bag. So mining geology at Imperial was in my university application, and the engineering geology at Portsmouth, which was a polytechnic there, was in that basket. And in the end, I went for Portsmouth. But surprise, surprise, in consultancy, I was offered a job before I'd even done my finals, literally just because I had a CV. Some people from the company that I worked for, Wardell Armstrong, who some of you might have met out there in the field, they used to send somebody to our degree program because so many graduates had gone from it. And just because I took a CV with me, I think that's what sparked their interest. So they offered me a job before I'd even finished my degree program. I didn't know where Newcastle under Lyme was when they offered me a job. So I came up here in 1991, and guess what I've ended up working on most of the time? It's stuff to do with mining. A lot of it is legacy issue stuff, but because I'm quite good at researching and ferreting out information, I used to do a lot of supporting. I was one of the first people in the firm. There were like 5 computers in the firm that could go on the internet, and I had one of them. And I used to support all the people overseas finding them documents. So some of the organizations that I've been hearing from this week, I'm like, I was reading your documents 30 years ago, 25 years ago. I was pulling out your information, all to do with mining, and looking at the ways in which some of those organizations, you were struggling even back then to do things the right way. So I don't come from an anti-mining, I come from a very, very pro-mining background. Even to the point, this became clear last year, one of the things I talked about with my student cohort was the application for the coal mine in the Lake District. And I was a lone voice at the time, but I was like, actually, if industry, as they were saying, the steel industry was saying, we need this coal because of the quality, etc., to go in our steel product, I'm like, wouldn't it be better for us to lead the world in having a green coal mine and source it locally rather than the other option? Because in effect, the steel industry is going to continue to buy coal from somewhere. And I'm like, if we get it from somewhere else, it's this thing that somewhere else is taking the hit for the environmental side, for the emissions, etc., etc. And I'm like, to me, that's not just. Because I'm like, and the whole of some of the discussions about stuff in the past, I'm like, how can we point the finger at developing countries for practices that most of the time we've initiated a lot of those practices. Where have they learned from? They've learned from us. And they've also learned that in order for us to buy from them, they need to do it cheaply because of the whole of the finance. I confessed to Sarah at lunchtime that I had a real issue with finance and economics, because to me, people in finance and economics were selfish, and they're the whole reason why we have such a problem. We're greedy, but they enable everybody's greed to be out there and grabby. And thankfully, Andy on Monday afternoon, so right in the first session, I'm like, oh my goodness, here's a finance person who seems to have the same sort of ideas and the same sort of ethics and the same sort of feelings about justice that I do. And I'm like, hooray. I'm like, this is really good. And I just think that has been continued all the way through. I don't think, this is probably where I start to cry, but I don't think I've ever been in such a big part of such a big community of people who are saying the same stuff as me. And that's really, really, it is so encouraging, because I've certainly felt like a lone voice in all sorts of ways. Since I was a kid, really, I was always the one that was pointing out that's not fair, usually in relation to other people, not usually myself, but certainly in relation to other people. So I'm like, and against it, I've kind of seen, or I kind of felt that with what happened with COVID, I'm like, this is a bit of a taster for how the world works together when there's something that's affecting all of us. And I'm kind of like, it didn't happen very well. It didn't go very well, did it? And I'm thinking, if this is what's going to happen with something, you know, like climate change and all of these things we're talking about, I'm like, that really isn't that's not a very optimistic outlook. But you guys have just brought such hope into that little bit of my world, because I'm like, and so many of you're out there, you know, in Africa, Canada, all of these different places, and you're saying those things, and you're in positions where you're speaking to the people who make decisions. You're speaking, you know, you are influencing. And I know for all of you, I can just, you know, you can just hear it, that you still, you know, you want to do more. You don't recognize, and it's fairly common, I think, but you don't recognize the influence that you're being in the places where you are. So if anything, it's like, you know, my last message to mankind, it's like, keep on doing it. And again, to pick up on stuff that Ludovine said, there is a lot more, I think, that we can do. We can be a lot more conscious in our decisions and our choices. And I'm thinking, how many times have I ever actually written to somebody and said, I found out that you're doing this. I don't think this is a good idea. And I'm like, I need to start exercising some of that supposed power that I have as a consumer, and say to people, actually, no, this is not, you know, if you've got to do it this way, then I don't want it. And you need to start doing something different. So I think all of us probably have untapped ways in which we can help to influence. But I think all of you are already doing so much. Right, draw breath. Stop to draw breath. Thank you for staying with me. I tried to pull out once I discovered that I was going to be on here. I went through the program and just thought, what has really, because all of it, everything that's been said has impacted me in some way. And I know I need quite a lot of time as well to process some of that, but there are certainly things that have grabbed me straight away. So really sorry if you're dialed in and you're listening, if you don't get a mention. It's like there has been something, all of you have spoken to me in some way, but I've only got 20 minutes, so I can't, you know, go into raptures about all of you. I'm really sorry. With my teaching head on, Olga's deep sea mining simulation, I'm like, yes, that's the sort of thing that I can do with a class happily. I can do it as outreach. I can do it with, you know, let's have dinner parties where we get people doing, you know, board games, etc. It's not that much different, as long as everyone brings along a phone, which they've usually got anyway. It's like, let's do this, guys. You know, anybody that you know, ask them if they want to play a game. You know, just don't tell them, you know, once they're in, they'll be so excited that they won't worry about the mining side of it. So that I've mentioned Andy as well already on Monday afternoon, and just knowing that there are people out there, that you are in the banks, you are in the funding institutions, and you do have a different way of looking at things, and you realize that things have got to change. I'm like, thank you, that's a good one. Tuesday morning, lots and lots of, I know that was kind of our rocks, it was one of our rock days, wasn't it, which was really exciting, and people actually doing projects. The thing that kept coming into my head, I think it's Schumacher, this whole idea of small is beautiful. And I'm just like, at the other conference, I remember talking to Sarah when Sarah had me ranting again, and I talked about because we were talking about geology and energy a bit more rather than the mining. But I remember one of the things I've always thought is that what we're looking at here, I think in order to do this, we're looking at lots and lots of small projects doing things the right way. The politicians seem to be looking, the way they go about things, they're looking for a one-stop shop that solves all of these problems. And it's like, it isn't there. It's made up of lots and lots of little decisions, lots and lots of business. And the whole thing with artisanal mining, again, in my head, I have pictures. I see those pictures of the children underground with their big eyes, all covered, all covered in mud. So I must admit that for me, artisanal mining probably had a bit of a bad reputation. But you guys, some of what you've said, I'm like, actually, no, it can be a real force for good. And obviously it comes in with the question that Sarah's been asking everybody. Now, she asked me last week, she was a bit naughty. She asked me in the JOLSOC, but I suppose you didn't know then that I was going to be here this week. And I went for the child straight away. And I think for the same reason that all you guys have been choosing the child, the 9-year-old child, is because I think everybody has expressed this idea that with the 9-year-old child, with that setting, everybody's talked about what we think we could do in that situation to make it better for that 9-year-old child. I think my favorite response was Estelle yesterday, because she went into a lot of detail about the potential benefits to that child of that income that's coming into their home. So that was good. The thing that I'm a bit puzzled about with that is that why is it that we thought we could do something about the 9-year-old child, but none of us thought that we could do anything about the deep sea mining? So I'm like, we might need to think about that, because I think that some of us, we were saying we don't know about the risks, but I think most of us, it's probably, we don't think that that is a good idea. The fact that we don't know, we've seen, we know about all the other times when we don't know about something, so we go ahead and do it and hope that it will be okay. It's like, no, the ocean, they found plastic, haven't they? Microplastics have been found in the deepest parts of the ocean. So we know, it's one big body of water. If you do something in one place, it's going to affect the whole thing. So actually, that's probably not a good idea. But we might need to do a bit more about that, possibly, I guess, at some point. Tuesday afternoon, burst the bubble, brilliant idea. But I think somehow you managed to get people that knew too much about mining. I'm like, you need to find some people that really don't know anything about mining. I think that would be interesting. And I know you said that you've asked children. Why not get children on here? I think, if that's okay, because, some of their insights and the way that they see things, I'm like, that's the way we need to see things. We can do something. This morning, we're talking about it's simple, the solutions. Lorraine, some of these things are so simple. The solutions are so simple and we make it complicated. So I think sometimes the children, and she talked as well about the value of educating children. And I kind of put 2 and 2 together when Jeff was talking about his work with the politicians. And it got me thinking, if we can have such an influence by doing the STEM thing, doing the ambassador thing, going in and doing outreach, etc. I was thinking, is there a good, enthusiastic GGE teacher in Eton, in Harrow, on the Oxford PPE degree course? Because we're told, aren't we, that most of our politicians, a lot of the prime ministers that we've had recently, that's the progression that they've made to Parliament. And that seems to be the trail for the people who are making the decisions. So again, we had a little bit of a chat. I don't know if Sarah's going to volunteer yet, but we've talked about a lot of the initiatives that we do. They're about reaching people who are, who are the, whatever, in the lower social economic, and that's great. We need to do that, but I think we also need to be looking at where the power brokers who are doing, who are making these decisions, we need to start getting to some of them when they're children, so that they get a passion for the planet, which they then take into politics, because it's a lot easier in effect to do that influencing when they're a child than when they're an adult and they've got the house and the mortgage and the 26 businesses and all the chairmanships, etc., etc., etc. Now I know, I can see you're looking, isn't it? We've only got a couple of minutes left. There is so much else that I could talk about, but I've warned her. I didn't tell her what it was going to be, but because she's been asking us this horrible sneaky question, about the cobalt. I apologise to those of you who are not geologists, because it's a bit of an in joke, really. But you've said several times, Sarah, that you're a risk manager, and that that's part of your, if you like, your work. So I'm like, have you ever actually done a risk assessment on licking rocks?
Well, I mean, having worked with some of the people who are speaking later on today, of course I have. And there are some rocks that are okay to lick, and there are other rocks that I really wouldn't lick. It depends on the context.
Thank you, because I was taught, with being taught by engineers, and I think people that a lot of us, we were going out to really sites that were minging. So we were told in no uncertain terms, do not pick up anything off the ground and put it in your mouth. So it is one of those things about geology, that there are certain things that, yes, and I still teach my students that taste is a way of discerning between different minerals. So yeah,
exactly. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that, Pauline.
Okay.
And I think with that, we need to move across to the fantastic Michael. But Pauline, we really value your inputs to everything that we're doing here. It is very much a community, and actually the sharing of the ideas and the challenging of one another is really important as well. So just, I guess, to kind of summarize what Pauline was going through there, before we give her a massive round of applause and a thank you for stepping in at the last moment before we move to Michael. So in terms of that first session that we had on Monday, really there was a lot of focus in on, okay, so change the business model of mining, and so that reflects some of what Pauline was just saying there. On the second session that we had on Tuesday morning, really looking at the diversity of perspectives coming through from a multitude of different people. We had speakers from the Philippines, from different parts of Africa. It was fantastic. Session number 3 was actually a very open and honest session. So actually, what do we need to be doing? We need to be honest, we need to build trust, we need to take accountability for what we're doing, and we need to work out what is truly valuable to us as human beings. Session 4, that's where we really looked at, okay, how can you calculate the true value of each asset? Is it just the financial value, or are we looking at the natural capital, the social capital, etc. as well? Session 5, which was yesterday afternoon, that's where we started off with some dinosaurs and we finished off with some donuts and some dignity. And so I think yesterday afternoon, I think Ludivine was actually almost out on the streets crying revolution. I mean, given that she's in France, that could turn out in an interesting fashion. And then I think this morning was actually more about how do we make sure that we're actually measuring the right stuff and we're sharing the right knowledge and we're using information and diverse information to be able to make decisions at different points in the value chain. So those are just some high level takeaways from each of those sessions. So our next speaker that we're going to go to immediately is the fantastic Michael. Now, what we've already, he already introduced himself a little bit earlier on, but Michael, if you would like to come to the stage, I know that Rose is going to share your slides. Everybody, please put your hands together, both for Pauline and for Michael. Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you. So I'll just kind of dive right into it here. As I mentioned, I'm going to be looking at the, just stick with the, thank you, Rose. What I'm going to do here is just a little bit of a brief accounting, pun intended, of the financial thread in ESG ratings. So it'll be a bit of a high-level survey of investor use cases, highlighting where and how ESG is linked to investment and financial metrics, decision hygiene, and decision making. But I'm going to start off with, and I like to plant the flag here a little bit, that ESG ratings were designed with the primary users of financial reporting in mind. That's the financial and the capital markets. ESG is an analytical tool suite, one among others used by capital markets and financial institutions. Thanks. The next slide, please. So this is one of my favorite movies is Avatar, which is, if you remember, is a film essentially about mining and community relations. I use this slide often to introduce my conflict risk assessments, but I think it has application here to the wider ESG space, which tries to qualify and attempts to quantify intangibles like the social license to operate that Miguel is going to be speaking to later. And that is summed up here by looking at, if you remember the concluding sequences in Avatar, and this is one of them, a shot from it, that are currently echoed around the world today in Peru, in the Sahel, in the DRC, and the consequent production, operational, and financial impairments that happen. What is noted here as bad quarterly statements. So where I'm going to now move off is to say there is four main categories of investors which hold the ownership of today's publicly listed companies. Institutional investors, and that's who I'll be focusing on, public sector owners, private corporations, and strategic individual investors. Now, institutional investors are by far the largest group, and they hold over 40% of global market capital. They are profit maximizing intermediaries. They invest on behalf of mutual funds, pension funds, and insurance companies. And that's the long-term stable capital that companies are thirsting for. US-based institutional investors account for about 2/3 of global institutional investor holdings, and they dominate the ownership of listed companies in the United States, in the UK, and in Canada. The average combined holdings of these companies, 10 largest institutional investors on a company basis, equals about 30% of their total equity capital. So now I want to try to draw the line into ESG. According to the 2020 Global Sustainable Investment Review, sustainable investing assets reached $35.3 trillion globally at the start of 2020, the beginning of the pandemic. And that's been a 15% increase from 2018. Approximately 36% of total assets under management are now sustainably linked or have it in their title. And this is also interesting because it's known as a tipping point. Similarly, the number of signatories to the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investment, PRI, is that institutional investors committed to ESG-oriented investment decisions has increased from 734 in 2010 to over 3,000 in 2020. The next slide, please. So a quick note on the abbreviation here. Where is the financial is what I'm using, not the traditional one. So ESG issues for investment purposes are constructed usually as a proxy for mispriced risks. Issues like sustainable business models that Sarah's alluded to and has already been covered, social license to operate coming down the pipe, or as I started within the opening slide, conflict. Now, MSCI, another one of the notable ESG raters, answers this question using 3 parts. So the first part is you'll see ESG linked to finance in cash flow performance. The investment metric on its own. We can follow mining company cash flows, and there is a correlation to ESG, and high ESG ratings are correlated with stronger cash flows. The relationship between valuations and better ESG ratings is sort of the second point there. And that's the underlying hypothesis of ESG investing in the first place. Essentially and eventually you get a lower weighted average cost of capital. That's the WACC in the bottom right-hand corner. But this relies on what is known in financial markets as net present value or discount cash flow models. And these models are showing out to be insufficient when they're confronted with things like uncertainty and irreversibility, which are also inside standardized statistical distributions. So something that ESG risk raters approach differently as well, how they manipulate their statistics. And then the third point here is idiosyncratic risks. And this is really sort of the wrench in the system. These require more trained analysts to further unpack an understanding of context, a deeper analytical foundation. The old adage that if all you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail comes to mind here. How permanent are the effects of these idiosyncratic risks? And I'm thinking here, usually it's events, something that plagues the industry, impacts, costs. Are they recurring? Is it something that you have to replace a washed out road every year, or sabotaged mine access points? Does it require replacement or substitution? ESG ratings have been transitioning away from their original objective, started in the 90s, of do no harm. They went through a phase between into the financial crisis and into the 2010s of data proliferation. You know, you just see reports of everything and anything going in, sort of the kitchen sink. And now it's become more about signaling the intentions and performance. Are companies talking or walking? Next slide, please. One of the loudest critiques of ESG ratings is the difference in ratings on the same company. The traditional WTF might apply here, and that's commonly I've heard as well. And that's what this slide tries to show you here. Company rating differences by industry from 3 different rating agencies: Thomson Reuters, I think it's now Refinitiv; Robeco Sam, which is now S&P; and Sustainalytics, which is now part of Morningstar. And as I mentioned, where I was not too long ago. The middle line on each of these 3 graphs is the rater's average score, with the difference in ratings to the other 2 raters on a decile gradation here. And what you get as you move up the scale is the amount of disagreement in the ratings of a company across the 3 raters. This is a nice visualization of the difference between rating methodologies. And as the differences grow, as you move to the left and the right of the mean scores, you'll see that's the split. And that's is interesting because what it does show is that there is eventually some strong agreement in ESG ratings, and that is regardless of the methodology, and that is who are the worst performers. So that top line, you'll see the biggest bump, those are the lowest scores. And they do seem to agree on who the worst is, but they don't necessarily agree on who the best is. A line here that you can take out of this is ESG measures from commonly used data providers neither provide information about systematic risk exposures nor exploitable mispricing. And that's what we're looking for in the capital markets. Next slide, please. So here's another link between the financial and the ESG ratings. So this time we're looking at ESG's top rated quintile minus the bottom rated ESG quintile. The top line in blue is for the ESG ratings. You get the 3 components. Environment is in yellow, the teal, the social, and G is the magenta. The silent S, you know, you can see it sort of lagged, but I think that's probably changed, and certainly we saw that happening through the pandemic. The most common global ESG investment approach is called a tilt, and this corresponds to negative and exclusionary screenings, or pretty simply what you have here is you buy the top percentile or quintile in ESG ratings from MSCI and sell the bottom. And there you can see what your performance would be on a portfolio of those. You also get, and I'll attach the paper and send it by Pastor et al. At 2021, where they documented that green returns are commonly the results of random shocks to ESG concerns. Those are the events that I was mentioning earlier, idiosyncratic risks. And they find little support for an ESG premium in expected returns. This is a growing consensus inside the investment world, and one that I've long advocated for. And it begins with a counterfactual on ROI, which is risk of an action here that I talk about. ESG investing may not generate your cumulative abnormal returns, or alpha, as they're commonly called, but it will save you dollars. So good ESG doesn't mean that your company gets a premium, but poor ESG means that it'll be discounted vis-a-vis its peers. The next slide, please. ESG reporting standards have developed and matured over the last 5+ years. Sustainability first meant more reporting and more transparency, but now you get, like I said, reports of everything and everything. But now we've started to move beyond that. We're now at a point where reporting is expected, and we're talking about better strategy. Is the signal investment analysts? Better strategy is a signal that investment analysts are sifting ESG data for to construct and support their financial narratives. For companies, this means increased investment in ESG expertise and intelligence. And this is from the mind face to the corporate offices to the boardroom. The green bars here show the level of importance attached to ESG issues by institutional investors, and thus the more common materiality. You'll hear issues that raters assess. This is on a 5-point Likert scale, with 5 being extremely important. And you'll see that all 10 issues noted here are in the survey are firmly on the more important side of the divide. But just as miners face a range of ESG issues, location, commodity, regulation, and weight, so too does the investor community. They even differ on what the definition of ESG is. And it's why you see things like in Europe, the introduction of the FSDR. The SEC has come out with taxonomy, the ISSB that I mentioned earlier, and other standards are aligning behind TCFD. Investors examine ESG ratings methodologies, and they pick those most aligned with their needs and often with the data collection and aggregation that underpin their ratings. That's what they're interested in, not so much the top line. I know at Sustainalytics, that was one of the things that we got from clients was, yes, they were interested in our top line assessment, but they were also as equally interested in the data that went into coming up with that line. And then the blue line here on this chart is the level of consensus measured by standard deviation. And again, this here shows where there is some disagreement. I think you see the two largest spreads come in related to GHG emissions and energy efficiency. So this might be whether an institutional investor has an exclusion of fossil fuels or not. So methodologically speaking, ESG ratings are essentially a vector. They are a management times an exposure. That's usually how they work, and are some derivative of it. Industries with higher exposures to material ESG issues tend to score worse on average than firms with less exposure. Again, my old company, Sustainalytics, just released a paper on this that you can find on their website. And I would suggest you read that, and you'll know that the industrial conglomerates, mining, steel, forestry are 3 of those 5 most exposed and riskiest industries. Risks such as climate change can be systematic and have a distribution of outcomes that are unknowable and yet present material risks such as access to resources, human, natural, or capital, and also the vulnerability of infrastructure and ultimately on corporate valuations. Next slide, please. ESG and financial risks are commonly referred to as the double materiality. We heard the triple bottom line. This is the double materiality here. And that's an approach that considers both outside in, financial analysis, and inside out, impact analysis for assessing materiality. And again, this is something that's foundational in all ESG ratings, regardless of methodology of the company. The slide further links where the financial and ESG ratings is for investors and analysts, something that miners, I think, would do well to understand to help focus their ESG resource allocation. And you can see the top one there is value. But if we go all the way down those 10 categories, even at the bottom, the WACC, as I mentioned before, is more than 50% very important or quite important. Next slide. So this is where I'll conclude. What was once voluntary is increasingly becoming mandatory. The convergence of environmental, social, and corporate governance standards, metrics, and taxonomies with financial risks is accelerating. This just scratches the surface of the topic. It's pretty deep. Coming from debt capital markets, as I mentioned, I'm embarrassed to say that I haven't even touched on that side of the corporate cost structure, the bond side. Sustainable linked bonds, green and blue bonds, and where the financials are for debt investors, and they have a different view on where ESG issues come up. For the mining executives and others that are engaged with them, I'll leave you with this little bit of wisdom for your ESG journeys, and this is something that Pauline just referred to in her opening, and that is, you cannot talk your way out of something you behaved your way into. So thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Rose, for inviting me. Thanks for your time, and I look forward to the ensuing conversation.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Michael. wise words, especially at the moment. You cannot talk your way out of something that you behaved your way into. Massive round of applause. Fantastic. Great. So we've got a number of questions coming in, but actually I'm going to bring Ludovine to the stage because she's been very active on the messaging behind the scenes. And instead of me just looking incredibly intelligent by asking you her questions, why doesn't Ludovine come to the stage and speak herself? On you go, Ludovine.
No, this is an ongoing conversation between all of us. Michael, thank you so much for this presentation. It's so packed of information. One of the things that I'm most interested in right now is, yes, there's a lot of criticism of ESG ratings, but in reality, I mean, is there also within the ESG rating universe a debate about the value of the data versus, you know, the value of its use? This data is produced because people buy it. The users and the buyers of this data have shaped the offering. I'm really interested to think about how we change their, you know, search for information. And is that something that you're seeing as part of the discussion, both on ratings, but also on the standards and frameworks you alluded to previously? Or are we not there yet?
So that's a good question, and it's a deep one. And yes, and both are separate, though there is an overlap. Certainly on the ESG rating side, the aggregators, essentially that's what they are, is aggregating data. This is your indicators, you know, and XYZ rating company uses 138 indicators. These ones have 700. This one has 38 per materiality. So this is where I mentioned that it's sort of like a vector. You have an exposure, and that's assessed based off of number of indicators, and that's going to be based off of qualitative and quantitative. So some of these things are fairly easy to find out. You know, how many women sit on your board, for instance. That's a fairly easily quantifiable. The social license to operate, your community relations, that's a little bit more difficult to put a finger on and assess numerically, though that's what they try to do, or we take account of it. So definitely there is the sourcing of the data. All of it is publicly available, and you're starting to see increased amounts of alternate data. So things coming from CSOs and NGOs. Transparency International, for instance, is something that I looked at. I did the tailings indicator when I was at Sustainalytics, or my team did, and we looked at, you know, data that was provided by RMI, by ICMM, by MAC, by IRMA, and started to hierarchically rank the efficacy of their membership and their reporting as a member. For your other question on ESG, and I'm just trying to remember where this. So the discussions on how it's used, that is the methodological difference, and you know, I don't think that's ever going to change. And even, you know, that people are saying, well, you know, the ESG ratings don't look like the credit ratings do, but I can talk to Moody's and S&P on the same country and get a different point of view. And they're using auditable financial data. That's where these standards are going towards. And this is something that the ISSB is looking at, because saying there is the penalty for, not necessarily a penalty. It's always been, well, if you don't report, what happens? Yes, the market might slap you on the wrist, but plenty of companies have turned a blind eye to that. Where the ISSB is interesting, at least from my perspective, is because it's attached to IFRS and accounting standards across the IFRS membership. And that is that these standards are going to have to be included by your auditors. And so if you don't have the data to supply to the auditors, then they can't sign off on your audit. Now, that is something that is not going to go over very well with the capital markets, because it has to be signed off by the auditor. So that's where I think it's a bit of the carrot and the stick that's going on here. And hopefully the carrot is you're going to be auditable, and therefore we have greater understanding and confidence in what's being reported. And therefore that's will allow us to make better decisions, both at the investment side, but also in the engagement with and the community relations that Pauline was talking about, the community relations back to the company, you know, so that you can have these conversations with the company and say, okay, here's where you're doing well. As you saw sort of in that chart with the 3 ratings differences, you know, the ones who are doing bad, everybody agrees on. It's how good you're doing becomes a little bit more diverse in what each individual ESG risk rating is measuring.
So with that, Michael, just one thing in terms of whether you're doing good or whether you're doing bad, or whether you're doing well or if you're doing poorly. Yeah. I guess that means, you know, like, again, what are you measuring against? Are we just talking about risk to financial things, or are we talking about risk to natural capital, social capital? And this then perhaps comes back to a lot of what we've been discussing over the week, is actually, what are we trying to create here? Are we just trying to make money in the same way that we've always done? Or are we trying to actually go through this step change in terms of a transition, etc.?
So this is the point where I said I wanted to plant the flag, because ESG is not a panacea.
Yeah.
It's and from my perspective, which is sort of horse collar or you know, blinders on, it is for the primary users of financial reporting. Yes, there's the hope that it does this and you're going to get better at that and greener this, and that's great. That's the hypothesis. But at the end of the day, it's for those that are making financial decisions, whether it's investing their capital. And it depends. Like I said, there's some that are strictly fundamental and there are impact investors. So they are looking at and pulling out the different data, and depending on the companies that they're looking at, they're going to have different use cases of the ESG ratings. So everybody's trying to make money, or in essence, generate the impact, and the impact will be felt by, you know, they relate it back to justifying the the investment. So if it's, you know, I'll put in $1 million, but I want to see education to the community, then how you measure education to the community is the thread via ESG ratings and or the indicators back to that $1 million. And if you didn't educate the whole community, then the $1 million, the investment didn't work or didn't work fully. So that's, I think, the line and the thread. We're trying to bring everything back via ESG ratings to dollars and cents. That's how we equate things. I think it was Coolidge who said that everything comes back to the economy, because that's how we value things today, so that we know what to invest in for tomorrow.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Michael. I think this is something as well to explore, because certainly with things like TCFD, so the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, the thing that often surprises people is we're not measuring climate, we're measuring the risk on finance that is posed by the climate. And it's almost the same kind of thing here with the ESG ratings. We're not actually talking about ESG in the way that perhaps an ESG specialist might talk about it. We're talking again about that linkage with money. And so organizations who think, hey, we're going after a really good score in our ESG ratings aren't necessarily going after the best ESG, or there's, you know, different interpretations there. So yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much, Michael. Absolutely brilliant, as always. Thank you so much for joining us. Massive round of applause. Brilliant. Cool. So from Michael to Miguel, so we're staying with the M's here. It gives me huge pleasure to welcome Miguel to the stage. Miguel, if you want to introduce yourself, again, I know that we met you at the beginning of the session here today. I'll let you finish clicking those buttons to get the slides up and working. We can see your screen at the moment, which is glorious. There we go. I'm sure that will come through in a second. So Miguel, and as you mentioned earlier on, is joining us from Peru, and is going to be talking through achieving a social license to operate through shared values. Everybody, please put your hands together for the fabulous Miguel.
Okay, thank you, Sarah, for the opportunity to share this presentation. Obviously, thank you for the invitation in this Responsibility Raw Materials Conference 2022. And give me the opportunity to present a one presentation that tried to how to achieve the social lines to operate through share value. These presentations is the product of several years of experience and of obtained lessons learned in the interesting and challenging work around the extractive activities and their relationship with the communities, authorities, and other stakeholders around to the mining activities. What in this occasion I want to present is the context and the challenges that currently exist in Peru, and what is very similar to other countries, and how through the innovate and social strategic not only can social conflict be reduced, but also sustainable development can be achieved. No? And how to achieve that is about the share value strategy. In the case of the mining context, in the case of Peru, when we talk about the mining, we associate in two aspects: the wealth and social development and the social conflict, because the mining activity in Peru is the most important pillar of the economy. It contributes approximately 10% of the GDP and the 60% of the export of the country being of the mining sector. But the social conflict is very special in the mining sector. No? 65% of the conflict in Peru is around to its relation with the mining sector. And the great social risk in this moment is because this conflict generated because a lack of communication and relationship with the community, a lack of transparency, not compliance with social and environmental commitments, and during the last years, this lack of capacity to resolve the conflict in the new government, no? And poor corporate governance in some companies. What is the challenges of mining in Peru right now? In Peru, in the almost 20 years, now generate a crisis of trust. No? Why? Because the mining activities is not possible to closing of social gaps and development of the regions that the mining activity exists. The little collaboration between the actors, the mining sector, authorities, companies, and communities to achieve a sustainable mining and with propose is difficult. Exists a little collaborations. The environmental ability exists because in Peru, in the Incas stage, exists the mining, and for this reason exists environmental damage. Now in Peru, approximately 8,000 environmental exists in all the country. The promotion of initiative to achieve a sustainable mining is a big challenge. All the world changed the energy matrix, and now we need to work very hard in this topic. No, reduce the emission of CO2, promotion of mining supplier and digital transformation, correct water use, and close of mining with communities. And the other important challenges for the mining sector is the authorities not grant in the correct time the permissions of license to exploration and operation activities. No? But we present now one social strategic that is product of the experience and the lesson learned. No? I think that now, not only in Peru, in all the world, it's important to improve cooperation through peaceful coexistence, generate trust, dialogue, and development of social projects. No? There be seeking to reduce and order prevent conflicts and meet the community's needs in order to maintain and strengthen the social lives to operate and improve the company image. It's clearly there is evidence in the world that when collaboration is promoted through dialogue with respect and trust, not only it is possible to reduce a conflict, but it is also possible to promote a sustainable development. No? For this reason, in this slide, put this highlights is the more collaboration, then less conflict, and then great probability of achieving sustainable development. With more cooperation with all actors, obviously reduce the level of conflict. And we need to work very hard in this objective. And we have obviously how to increase cooperation and reduce the level of conflict. We propose as 7 steps. No? First is open the doors and key stakeholders, good relationship, obviously with a trust and with a respect, fulfillment of commitments. The transparency is very important. For example, the record of commitments, or maybe one book of commitments for commitments of the all mining with the communities and the governance, the authorities with the communities is important. Then is a sustainable development project, but creating shared value. In the next slide, I explain this. What is the shared value initiative? Obviously, we need a multi-actor approach. Engaging the national government is very important. They improve the perception about the communication face-to-face and communications very different strategies, and integration into the local economy is important. The employment, the local employment, and the local suppliers that give opportunity. The mining company is necessary to give opportunity to the local supplier. And in the last step is the companies, and I think in all industry now, need to work to propose. No? Sustainable is based on the business, on the ESG that Michael explained in the before presentation is very important. No? Now, this is the same slide, but obviously in the different presentation, it's important that we need to comply with agreements. We need to focus in high impact social projects. We need to create shared value, improve the perception, and we obtain the social acceptance that is very important for this activity. I talk about what is the evolution of the corporate social responsibility. No? First, I think 30 years or 40 years ago, we talked about the philanthropy, the donation, and voluntary, but it's not linking in to the business strategic, to the core business. No, it's additional. It's a spend. No? When emerging the corporate social responsibility, talk about we need a good citizen. We talk about the sustainability, but it's continue to not link to the business. No? Beyond the corporate social responsibility, talk about now in 2009, for example, in 2012, the green capitalism, the circular economy, the inclusive capitalism, and then emerging the measure of social impacts, achieving a high ESG and green scores, now the fifth. Then now talk about the purpose. Why do we exist as a company? It's a very important question, and I think now in the world and all industries talk about this. Why exist the company? Exists only to obtain the income, the maximum income for the shareholders, or the company exists to generate improve the quality of life and improve of the world around to the industry. And now for this, how do companies make this purpose? And I think creating the share value initiative is very important, because in the case of share value, it's not a new corporate social responsibility. It's a different, it's a business strategic. It's a and I put that Mike Porter mentioned, no, the businesses acting as business, not as charitable donors, are the most powerful force for addressing the pressing issues we face. It's different topic, no? And if I mention quickly the the history about the share value. No? So in 2011, Mike Porter and Mark Kremen writing one article in Harvard Business Review, and in these years, it's incredible, but in this year, the legitimacy of business has diminished because business growth is perceived as being achieved at the expense of the community. No? In 2011, but I think continue this perception. No? And it's different. This is one slide that I show the difference of the corporate social responsibility and share value. No? In the corporate social responsibility is a response to external pressures. In the case of share value, respond to the idea is to create a joint value for the business and the community. And in the case of corporate social responsibility, led by the Department of Internal Communication and Corporate Affairs. In the case of share value, driven by the CEO and the senior manager team across the company. Why? Because it's a business strategic. No, it's not a corporate social responsibility different. No? And in this slide, I show that the idea of share value is in the intersection of social needs, corporate resource, and business opportunities. Share value is a business strategy that management to increase the income of all actors related to the company. It is an increase in the revenue pie and not a reduction of one actor for the benefit of another. No? This is very important because some people think, okay, this share value is a new corporate social responsibility. No, share value is a business strategy because the idea is how to resolve the needs, but at the same time generate value for the company. No? And in this slide, I show that the share value require a change in perspective from the effort to result. For example, is normal considering that the social problem as a community issue, view the social issues as a business priority is when you think in the share value. And then in this slide, I talk about the current paradigm and create a new paradigm. No? Share value provides new opportunities to create a space from the constructive dialogue and competitive solutions. For example, in the case of the negative environmental impacts, reduction of water source and environmental ability. Why now, if the companies think about the share value initiative, how we create a water market, for example, that allow more efficient extractive operation and ensures the stability of quality of water supply. No? It's different paradigm. No? And in development of share value, not only makes it possible to maintain a social lines to operate, but it's also help to building a more sustainable world. And I think it's important for me this slide because with share value projects, you help achieve the SDG. It's true because the share value, if you think that the company need to make SDG, for example, if you think, okay, I want one project of SDG, but the project is necessary to generate value for the company, now in this moment you generate a share value. It's the same of ESG. No, I think that the ESG commitments is necessary to reformulate and achieve share value projects. If the ESG commitments generate share value, is good for all. It's good for the company because the share value initiative obtain a value for the company too, for the shareholders, and resolve one needs. No? And the share value obviously contribute to reinventing capitalism and fighting the cause of climate change. No? And this is some examples of share value. I talk about only for the development and competitive local supplier because for me, this is the best example of share value because if the company to work very hard to training the local suppliers and the local supplier give a competitive service for the company is better for all, better for the company, better for the communities, better for the people, generate more jobs, and the companies obtain a good service. No? This is one picture of the one example of share value. Is important because, for example, one developed roundtable of Hualgayoc district in Cajamarca region in north of Peru began with a strike after a deep dialogue where it was agreed that the company could provide an initial fund and help manage funds from the national and regional governments. Positive meetings were held that conclude with a lunch invited by authorities. No? I think this is one free picture that show that the good examples. No? Then I will finish talk about the letters of the CEOs that in the BlackRock funds talk about the proposed. No? Larry Fink, CEO in 2018 and 2019. I think that in these years and continue, Larry Fink talk about without a sense of purpose, no business, whether public or private, can achieve its full potential. It's very important. No? It will eventually lose its license to operate with stakeholders. If not have a proposal, if not work very hard to make the proposal, probably to reduce the license to operate. And the other topic important for me is profit is in no way inconsistent with propose. In fact, profit and propose are intrinsically linked. It's very important for me, and I think that is necessary to talk about the propose. Why? Because how to the company made a good propose? If we assume the share value strategic, it's possible to make a good propose in short time. And then I finalize this presentation and open to the question, and only mention the lesson learned. No, in this slide. At the end, for me, there is not a magic recipe for a good relationship, and our achievements are the result of the constant learning. Thank you.
Miguel, thank you so much for this. It's absolutely brilliant, the insight that you have brought into our room today. Thank you so much. And there are questions coming in left, right, and center, which I propose what we'll do is, firstly, we'll give you a big round of applause to say thank you from the other side of our muted microphones. But what I propose we do is actually, if you can take a look at those questions and answer them online, because we have Manuel Pulgar Vidal, who is with us, and he has only got 20 minutes in his window.
Okay.
So
I understand.
What I propose we do is let's hear from Manuel so that we can actually hear what he's got to say, and then Miguel, then we can come back to you. Is that okay?
No, okay, no problem.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That was truly brilliant. I've got so many notes. Thank you very much. Fantastic. So everybody, now we're going to move on to the fantastic Manuel. Now, Manuel, I'm going to invite you to introduce yourself to everybody. Yeah, take it away. Round of applause. Thank you very much, Manuel.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah. And thank you, Miguel, for your flexibility. And sorry that I have time constraints that are really, really big. But okay, let's try to do it on time. So I am Manuel Pulgar Vidal, currently working as Climate and Energy Global Practice Leader with WWF International. Used to be Minister of the Environment of Peru in between 2011 and 2016, and as for that, President of the Climate COP20 conference just a year before of Paris. And before of that, the Executive Director of the Peruvian Society for Environmental Law, in which I used to be mostly focused in mining and the environment. So this is a topic that it is for me so important and that I have developed in my professional career for a long time. So having said that, let me focus in what the organizers requested me to address, the role of mining in a just transition. And let me start by making a clarification, because I think that in some way we could confuse terms. We know what does it mean just transition, that it is how to address the negative consequences that it could be created because of a desired change in some places. So development, jobs, salary, social benefits, among some others. So the point is, if we know that we are going to phase out definitively coal, how can we manage coal area? As it is happening in Asturias, in the north of Spain, as it is happening in the Silesia, in Poland, and in many places of the world in which they are working in the just transition. And a different thing, it is the energy transition. The energy transition, it is what the science has suggested through the IPCC 1.5 special report, that we have transit, that we have walk. They have suggested that we have walk for transition. The energy one, the industry, the infrastructure and buildings and cities one, and finally the land use change, deforestation, agriculture, so all what it is more related to the nature. So that is the energy transition. And probably in this speech of 10, 12 minutes, I will try to connect both. But the focus, it will be on the role of mining in the sectorial transformation, and what is the role that just transition could play, in my point of view, as an opportunity for the mining sector. So to start to give to you 7 approaches to that relation, let me start by saying that it is amazing how much we have progress in the climate debate. I am used to using the analogy of a solar system. If you imagine the formation of a solar system, of our solar system, the first thing that emerged, it was the main star, our sun. After that, a group of gravitational forces that allow the system to be well aligned in good orbits in between planets and satellites. It is exactly the same with the climate debate. So let me say that in my point of view, the climate debate has already gotten a good main star, that it is our collective vision. It is amazing, friends, how much nobody is doubting that we shouldn't raise temperature in more than 1.5. That is like Stone Britain. Nobody doubts. And even more, IPCC has told us that every half degree matters. So that is a key threshold that probably we could overshoot, I hope not, but even in that situation, we are planning to manage it well, to have no more than 1.5 by the end of the century. Based on that, nobody's doubting that to get there, we have to move our economies to be net zero in emission by 2050 and resilient. So economic resilience, human being resilience, infrastructure resilience. So resilient, it is the second main objective by 2050. And because of that, also we know that we have at least to reduce emissions in 50% by 2030. That is why many organizations are saying that this is the decisive decade, a decisive decade in which we must strengthen the transition that I've already mentioned, those 4 transitions, with an addition, fortunately, that now a new concept is coming into the debate, a new kid on the block, that it is the nature positive concept, something that we hope it could be consolidated in the coming Biodiversity Convention COP15 in Kunming, China. So that is the main star. And fortunately, that main star, it has been well complemented with strong gravity forces. One of those, it is that now the climate debate, it is an economy one. And that is key. The change, things are changing, strongly changing. And it is because the economy, it is defining new rules. Probably some of you can doubt that we have already entered into a new climate economy. Probably we are in the preliminary steps, but it is irreversible. The world will have a climate economy because many economic conditions that have been taken based in climate consideration. So that economic force, it is changing things at a point that if you are from a small country in emissions, as in Peru, don't take that into consideration because now it not depends on how much emissions you have. Peru has 0.3% of emission. And we can say, okay, we don't have any responsibility. That is not true. If we are not able to consider that this is an economic debate, we will be soon behind the others. And that is not fair for our countries and for our citizens. So that is the first element. And the second, it is for the miners. Despite that for many countries in tropical areas in the global south, our main source of emission, it is because of deforestation, land use, agriculture, and many of those practices. That shouldn't divest you, that also you have a responsibility. Because it is not about what is the main source of emission. It is about how are you planning to continue exporting your products into regions that are demanding more climate consideration. That's the point. Let's see Europe and how many new climate considerations they are defining. Let me finish this baseline by saying, on the other hand, now we are working into what the Secretary General, Guterres, the UN Secretary General, called the credibility gap. We do need to have credible climate claims. It is not just to put a title that I am carbon positive, carbon neutral, nature. Oh, no, it is, okay, how much you are supporting that claim strongly on science, and how much you are making people being able to access to that information and to know that you are developing progress, and how much you can really show your progress in a way in which it could be credible. And that is key. So be careful with any claim that it is not strongly supported by science. In that sense, it has been fantastic that the ICMM, the International Council on Metals and Minerals, in November or December, I participated in that released the net zero commitment. And I hope that more corporations, more mining companies can join that net zero commitment of the ICMM. So that is the baseline. Now let me, in 4 minutes, share with you 7 visions that you have to consider to define your own strategy and to really fit your mining activity into the just transition and the energy transformation. First approach, you have to work in mitigation and adaptation. And for sure, when we think about mitigation, it is about scope 1, that it is related to the sources that you own, scope 3, that it is the indirect emissions because of the energy that you acquire, and scope 3, probably the most difficult, that it is related to your clients and customers. But you have to have a clear strategy. In scope 1, vehicle electrification, energy efficiency, there are many, many ways to address scope 1. Scope 3, access to renewable energy. I hope to see countries defining clear hydrogen policies as a way to provide more clean sources of energy. Chile is doing that. Peru, not yet. Not many countries in case of Latin America, but that is something original. And scope 3, probably it could take some more time, but also it is a key element. Second condition, or second approach, connect your activity with the new global economy. We know that in its extractive step, mining, it is not the main source of emission. For sure, if you compare that one with fossil fuels industry, you have a completely different situation. But despite of that, there are some new conditions that are emerging in the scenario. Carbon pricing, emissions trade system, the new decision that Europe is taking to make this carbon border adjustment. So the point it is that your competitiveness, it will be measured not because of the GDP or how much you are able to contribute with taxes. It is because of your volume of carbon, and that it will be measured, and how much you are doing an effort to reduce that volume of carbon. And if not, your product will be punished. Not you, your product will be punished, even your reputation in some cases. Also, Europe, it is discussing the green taxonomy. They have started to bring more closer the financial sector as a way to say, these are eligible activities because are sustainable. This one, not too much. So that is part of the new element of this new economy that it is emerging. And also we have this climate-related financial disclosure. We have many, many good examples on how much the economy, it is playing a new role. Third approach, connect your activity with the non-state actors' agenda. The race to zero, the race to resilience, the sectorial breakthroughs, the new Marrakesh Partnership 2.0, that it is about non-state actors. For me, it was amazing to see that in COP26, we had half and a half, 50% of parties countries, 50% of non-state actors with the top CEOs. And that is good because what it is happening, it is that now this process has become to be not only a country-driven or party-driven, it is a multi-actor process, and you have to be part of that. But for sure, there are some difficulties. There are some asteroids to continue with our solar system. The lack of credibility, the carbon markets, a lot of critics about the carbon market, how to avoid to buy carbon credits to carbon cowboys. Fortunately, there are many initiatives as a voluntary carbon market integrity initiative that are addressing that difficulty. So my recommendation to the mining sector is that if you are planning to go through carbon credits, check the integrity rules. That is key. And respect the safeguard and respect the rights among some others. Fourth element, also there are opportunities on mining. Because of the energy transition, the industry, it will be more intensive in some metals. So graphite, copper, lithium, indium, many of those metals will emerge as a great opportunity because the new technology that it is emerging. In that sense, it is important what the World Bank is recommending or suggesting through this concept of climate smart mining, that it is so important that has 4 elements: climate mitigation, climate adaptation, reducing material impact, and creating marketing opportunities. Following and define your strategy in that way. And look, if the mining sector will have that opportunity because of the intensivity of the use of those metals, probably could be a sector that can manage well the just transition, can bring workers that have left their positions because of something that we have finally phasing out, to bring it into more sustainable activities, even into the mining sector. So look and think about of that. A 5th element, it is that also it is emerging this nature positive concept. And this new nature positive concept obliges us to think beyond the business as usual no-go areas. There will be more sensitivity in protecting forest coverage, in protecting ecosystem and its integrity. And that is something that you have to consider. 6th element, it is about your internal organization, how to manage this. And there is a very good document prepared by the Business for Sustainable Responsibility, that it is a guide for the mining sector that are suggesting how to protect value and how to create value. I don't have time to go one by one to that, but there are many, many things in the good literature that are emerging to link this relation in between mining and climate. And finally, follow what it is happening domestically. What are the NDC in the country in which you are developing your activity? The NDC, remember, it is the climate plan. What is the long-term vision toward a 2050 net zero time in that country? What is the climate plan or the climate action plan? No? What are the opportunities to bring more closer the Ministry of Finance to the Ministry of the Environment? How can we really develop something that it is more related to the ecological transition? Because even the governance around the world is changing. Around the world, in Europe, France, and Spain, they have created a Ministry for Ecological Transition. That means that now they are looking beyond the environment. They are looking to connect energy transition with the environment, with the economy. And that is a trend that it will continue happening. So those, in 15 minutes, sorry, Sarah, that I took 5 more minutes, it is 7 approaches to connect mining with the climate debate, with the new economy, and with the new social demands. So thank you very much for this time.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Manuel. I really, really appreciate your time coming and speaking with us. Round of applause from everybody. Absolutely fantastic. And I think what we had here as well was where Miguel was giving us some really practical suggestions with regards to, say, that social license to operate, then elevating up to that global climate perspective, and especially linking back into COP26, etc. as well. Now, Manuel, I know that you have to go to another appointment, so we will give you another round of applause. And we'll welcome Stewart Mccracken to the stage. Excellent. So we'll go from Peru to Vancouver. So Stewart, if you would like to start sharing your slides, we can then introduce you properly, and we could admit the fact that once upon a time we used to work together, which was a glorious time. So everybody, please put your hands together for Dr. Stewart Mccracken. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sarah. Great to be with everyone today, and good morning, good afternoon. Before I begin my presentation today, I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations here in Vancouver. I really want to take a bit of a step backwards. We've really been talking with Miguel, Michael, Manuel in a very global sense, and really big issues, whether it's ESG affecting how we finance what we do, big issues around how we account for what the mining industry does. I want to take it right back to the initial steps when we don't even have an industry yet. We're thinking as an exploration group, and we're going into areas for the first time where the communities we may be working with really have no understanding of what is mining and why are we there. So starting with our policies, which is always a good place to start with any company, Teck has a series of policies around how we communicate with Indigenous peoples, and really our commitment to how we think about resource development. Going to the 3 bullet points there, I think as an exploration group, we recognise that we are typically the first people to come into an area. We're the first boots on the ground, as we say. And we're very cognizant of the fact that first impressions matter. So as exploration geologists coming into communities for the first time, talking about what we are planning to do, it's really our role as ambassadors, both for Teck, but also the greater mining industry at large, to be really open, respectful, build these strong relationships. I think as Miguel was talking, try to think about truly sustainable outcomes that aren't necessarily just around building a mine and exploiting that mine. What is more that we can do to ensure that our impact in this area is very long-term, is very positive, and is actually going to be a win-win. So we obviously go through the process of early dialogue. We talk about the free, prior, informed consent to really understand what is needed, and talk to the local communities, Indigenous people, about what they're trying to achieve. Not just what we're trying to achieve, how we can work with them, enable them to achieve their own goals. I think it's really worth recognizing, just on the previous slide, that people have very high expectations. People are well informed these days. I had a wonderful experience of flying into a creek in Irian. We landed in 2 choppers in the middle of nowhere, and a young lady stepped out of the bush with her iPhone and photographed us as we landed in the middle of this wilderness area. So we are always connected to something. So it's understanding how we communicate why we're there, how we understand what their desires are, their strong desire to benefit from this green metal transition, but not at any cost. They obviously wish to preserve their peoples, their environments, and sustain their own lifestyles. Next slide, thanks. So I'll use 2 examples of what we're doing at Teck Resources. One example, the first one from northern Vancouver Island. So we staked some ground in the north of the island. We also had some joint ventures with other junior companies up there. This all started in late 2019, October. And as we got this ground, we quickly engaged with the Quatsino First Nation, who are the traditional landowners in this area. As you can imagine, within a few months, we were in the pandemic. So that raised a really interesting issue on how you engage with people who quite rightly were trying to also isolate, how we go about thinking what we can do to help them, how we can do the work, but more importantly, listening to what they really wanted us to do. Importantly, what we learned from this process was we did not submit a permit until we discussed it with the Indigenous groups. We wanted them to review what we were submitting, provide input, and where necessary, change what we were actually submitting. Now, that did lead to delays. It did lead to some challenges around achieving what we wanted to do. but ultimately it built really strong trust between our groups who are on the ground and the Indigenous groups that we were working with. So yes, it cost us some time, but it had amazing benefits in the long run. As we were doing our work, we were employing the people from the community as cultural monitors, as assistants, really to ensure there was a good dialogue. We were doing inductions and awareness training with our contractors coming in from outside, and really just developing this environment of trust and a commitment to, we'd said we'd do some things, and we are going to do those things. So it's this talk, listen, do through the whole process. Just move to the next example. So jumping from Vancouver Island way down to northern Chile. So we're in a project called Juan, which is close to the Peruvian border. The real issue here is time. As you can see, that circuitous journey here from 2006 through to today. This is a program that has had many moments, and what's been critical through this whole time is maintaining communication with what is a very isolated community in northern Chile. They're high altitude, they're separated from the coastal communities. So making sure we are always understanding what they want, keeping the dialogue open, communicating, understanding where things changed. As you can see, there were multiple events through there where we were renegotiating our access, and conditions were changing. Their expectations were changing. What we wanted to do was changing. So that dialogue through that time, that patience that was required to ensure that we weren't just pushing forward our own plans, we were very much listening to what the communities wanted us to take into account. And that ultimately led to a successful drilling program last year, successful in the fact that we completed the drill program, not that we discovered a great ore body, but ultimately that we were able to do our work in a way that was cognizant of the community, did not damage the environment, and have walked away with leaving some quite good benefits for that community. I think it's worth coming back to the pandemic. I think it's been really fascinating to see how we as an industry could help these communities, these very isolated communities, which were often being ignored by their local governments, and really help them survive and grow through these times. So just moving to the last slide, Rose. Just summing up, it's as we think about taking the first steps into any exploration program, the most critical thing for us is to make sure we know who we need to talk to. Who are the true owners of the land? Who are the true people who speak for that land? And engage and build those relationships. Don't assume. Make sure that when we're planning these engagements, we don't assume that we can get everything done in a very short time. This initial stage can take a long time, but if you get it right, it means that what you do later can be very successful. But if you get this wrong, you can be in for years of hurt where you haven't actually built those relationships. So it's allocating the time, the people, the money to actually get this right and adjust the timelines accordingly as you evolve through these relationships. As I said before, lots of talking, lots of cups of tea, coffee, mate, and listening to what people want. And ultimately, when we commit to things, make sure we do what we said we're going to do. There's nothing worse than false words. So going in with a very sort of open, humble way of thinking, listening to what is required, not assuming that they'll let us even do the work. They might say no, they do have the ultimate veto. And always saying we will operate on their land, respecting them, respecting the environment, and respecting ultimately their desire to build a sustainable life for their communities. But thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Stewart. Absolutely brilliant. Round of applause. Fantastic. So, Stewart, with regards to this, and I mean, I love what you said there about they have, the communities have the ultimate veto. It's their land. With regards to this now, you look very fresh-faced. So, I'm sure that, this is, 25 again, but there are a number of years of experience you have within the sector. How do you see that the sector has changed over time? I mean, have we always had this awareness with regards to the local communities, or has this been changing?
I think the big thing, and obviously it's being enshrined in legislation, but this concept of FPIC, or free, prior, informed consent, is changing the way that we do engage. There's no longer the assumption that I'll use the term that the white males from the city can go in and do what they want to do in these areas. That these resources such as water, forestry, under the ground, whatever you want to talk about, are owned by many other people, and many other people speak for those. So I think there's been a strong awareness in my, as you said, 25, 30 years of this industry, of going from that presumption to that understanding that actually you're here as a visitor and you have to engage and get permission. And you can't assume you have that permission before you get there. Mm-hmm. So it's a really shifting that power balance, and understanding that if you can't talk about positive outcomes, win-win solutions, then why would we do this? And I think I don't know who mentioned it today, but maybe it's right at the beginning. We can assume that we're doing this for the greater good of the earth. We all need these wonderful green metals. But if they're polluted and damaged and bloody from the very beginning, are we really achieving what we want to achieve, or we're just putting bad things into our iPhones?
Yeah, exactly. So with that, Stewart, with regards to communities and people change their minds as well. So you might have permission and consent from a group of people, and then for whatever reasons, things change. How do you deal with those changes?
Well, that example from Northern Chile, 5 or 4 different negotiations, you might lose access. You might have to say that exploration project is no longer viable if you cannot have that access. So I think most successful exploration groups come in with plan A's to Z. So you do have different options you need to think about how you balance your priorities, and you might just say this project is not possible because there is no sustainable process to go through. So that's obviously the last thing we want to get to, but it's ultimately, if you cannot accept that, then we're probably in the wrong business these days. That not every project will be successful. Not every project can proceed because you don't have total veto on what gets done.
Miguel, perhaps if I bring you in on this conversation, I saw you nodding there in agreement with Stewart. What's your opinion on this?
Yes, I agree with Stewart. I think that the communities have a big concerns, no, about how the company to works, how the company to exploring. And obviously the people and the leader change the opinions. No? I think that the best way is constantly dialogue, but not any dialogue. It's necessary dialogue with respect and with good faith. No? We need to generate a trust and build the trust. For this reason, I insist that it is important the coexistence. No? The live with the communities. I think that the best, for example, the best community relations people is the geologist in the first stage. No? If the geologists work very, very with respect, no? Listen to people, talk about the concerns, explain a lot that the works that the company, the idea of the company will begin in the initial of the exploration, we obtain a good relation. No? For example, I know in Chile and Peru now the exploration is the first stage, but not only go will go the geologists, will go a short community relation teams. No? Talk with the authorities, talk with the communities, and generate a good relation. No? Obviously, now in the world, the possibility that all exploration activities made is impossible because depend of the the environment situation, depend of the people, no, and other topics. But I think that the new paradigm now in the world is because the world needs minerals, no? And in South America, in special, is important. The copper portfolio of the copper is very interesting, but we need to work with mining, with mining more sustainable. No? I think this is the big objective for all companies now. No?
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Miguel. Stewart, just to come back to yourself. So, I mean, this is something where, as an exploration geologist, I mean, it's the most amazing opportunity / challenge, I think, for those of us who've grown up licking rocks, as Pauline would say, or maybe not licking rocks, depending on what the risk assessment says. But actually, there is this massively wide array of skills that an exploration geologist has to have in order to be able to make sure that these projects get off on the right foot, and also so that we can say, you know what, there might be the most glorious array of copper in the ground, but actually the social and the environmental components basically say, no, don't do it. Do you think that those skill sets are being taught to those geoscientists, or is it something that we're having to learn on the job?
Yeah, really good question, Sarah. I can only talk to my own experience. I did not learn these skills at university. I learned lots of other skills, but not necessarily transferable. But I was a bushwalker. I was a rock climber. I was an environmentalist in the early days of no dams in Tasmania back in the 80s in Australia. I came into geology because I love rocks, but I also came into geology because I love the environment we work in. And so I think as we're scientists first and maybe business people second in many cases, but certainly when I go out to a project, I'm now thinking not just about, is there an ore body there, but it's also what kind of mine could this be? And also, can it be closed properly? So what are the greater impacts going to be? What impact will we have on this environment? And is there any way to return it to what it started as? I'm not a real fan of this concept of net positive, because I actually see the Earth as this perfect beast. So how can we improve on the Earth? This very arrogant term of being net positive. But certainly being net neutral, I think, is a really good outcome. And I think as scientists, as environmentalists, we go in with eyes wide open to think about what we can do and what we can't do, and what we can control and what we can't control. And as Miguel says, we are the first there. It's really important that we send the right messages back to our management, but also to other people as well, that we are communicating what we see.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Stewart. So everybody, please put your hands together for the fabulous Stewart Mccracken. Thank you very much, Stewart. Great. Awesome. So now what we're going to do is we've been in Peru, and then we went Canada, Chile. Now we're going to come back to the UK, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome to our virtual stage Paul Monks. So Paul, if you want to find that unmute button, etc., we will welcome you to our stage here. And Paul, I will let you introduce yourself. Thank you so much. Round of applause.
Thank you, Sarah, for that, and thank you for that kind introduction. Let me just find my presentation. There we go.
So while Paul is just sharing his presentation, so Paul is the Chief Scientific Advisor to BEIS, which is in the UK, our main government department that deals with all things business, industry, etc. And Paul is the fabulous facilitator, or basically the person pulling together a lot of the information, or helping to pull together a lot of the information that will be going into the UK's mineral strategy. So great, we can see your slides now, Paul, in the PowerPoint format.
Yes, I'm having that classical window problem, aren't I? I've not chosen the right window somehow. Let me just
it's okay.
Share and try again.
It's all good. So some of the people who we've had speaking this week.
Right, super.
There we go.
There,
fabulous. Everybody put your hands together for the fabulous Paul Monks.
Thank you. That's an introduction that I've now got to follow. Thank you very much, Sarah, for that. So for those, Sarah was just saying, I'm Paul Monks, I'm the Chief Scientific Advisor at the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. And I'll get to what Sarah was talking about in a few moments' time. So I'm just going to give you the journey that we've been on in terms of thinking around the challenges of net zero and critical minerals as part of our activities. That's, of course, if I can actually change my slide, which is the next challenge. There we go. Super. So our framing for this and our entry point for this was thinking about net zero. So in the UK context, that was in 2008. We were one of the first countries in the world to bring in legislation to decrease our greenhouse gas emissions by then 80% of 1990 levels by 2050. And lastly, quite recently in 2019, we upped that ambition to 100% by 1990 levels, and we call that net zero. The way that we do that is through a series of climate budgets, and we just set the last one, Carbon Budget 6, which is our goal for the statutory goal for the mid-2030s, midpoint of 2035, which was a 78% reduction compared to 1990 levels. And that rolls up one level to the COP process and the nationally determined contribution, and is actually our contribution to the COP26 goal as part of that. Just very briefly before we kind of get into that, and I segue into critical minerals from that, how do you achieve that? Well, and this is taken from the Climate Change Committee's work, who are the body that hold the government to account around the goals that they've set for decarbonisation. You reduce demand and improve efficiency, very, very important. Must remember at all times, if you don't have to create it, you don't have to decarbonise it. If you can use it more efficiently, you have to create less of it. But actually, there's a whole bunch of low carbon solutions, which include electrification, hydrogen, CCS and the like, as well as large amounts of low carbon energy and land use sectors as well that are part of that. And this, in a way, and this transition, which is on the right-hand side here, provides the backdrop, if you will, for thinking a little bit about critical minerals and their availability in that transition. Before I jump into that, I just want to make one larger point around this. This is a systems problem. This is a systems problem. So on this slide, I've got the energy transition. On the left-hand side, the energy sources, gas, electricity, oil and petroleum. On the right-hand side, I've got some usage sectors, and you can see kind of a spaghetti diagram there. So we've got that transition. So we've got that system and that systems thinking that we need around that. But that system also sits in a financial system that has to facilitate that as well. And it also sits in a consumer behavior and behavior change system, because it's people that use technology, it's people that use energy, and that's got to be in there as well. But it also sits in this supply side economic transition bit as well, and the supplies and changing patterns of that system and supplies within that system that is important. So not only is this a systems problem, this is a systems problem, and in reality it's a systems problem, because I've described it in the UK context, but that also sits in a global energy transition context and a global economic transition context as well. So you've got the system itself that interacts with the financial consumer behaviors, that systems of systems, but it's also a global problem. It's a systems problem. I probably actually can go to 6 if I stretch it, but I'm not going to, because it just ends up with me saying systems very quickly. So I think that's the landscape that we're working on, and actually critical minerals and materials in that transition, the changing shape of that, is actually a really important feature of thinking towards the future. And there are some key technologies in that. In future technologies, I could talk about solar and renewables now and what they need, but CCS, hydrogen, GGR technology, greenhouse gas removal technology is also going to be that, biomass and conventional burning technologies as well. So just to say that we're, in a way, we're thinking of that, and we're thinking about the materials we're going to need in order to do that. And that, in a way, brings us to the subject of what you've been talking about and some of the aspects of that. And that brings us quite nicely to critical minerals. There's a nice Lord Sedwell quote, who's former Cabinet Secretary here in the UK. Critical minerals, semiconductors and data are the oil, steel, and electricity of the 21st century. I think it's pointing to, in some senses, the challenge of the transition in a way, and how these things are going to be absolutely critical as part of this. So, I mean, in a way, it's a whole economy issue, and it's going to be essential for any country's security and economic prosperity as part of that. And without that, we're not going to be able to achieve net zero, which is part of that key transition to decarbonising the world. And on the right hand side is a criticality assessment. There are plenty of them around. The European Union, the US have all done them that look at supply and economic vulnerability in some sense in this, and the different minerals as matched around this. And as I said, I chair a group with Sarah and a number of other people around this. We've pulled this problem apart a little bit, and it's not just a supply side problem; it's a systems problem, like the net zero transition. Few of these minerals are used on their own. They're used in combination. They're geographically spread. They've got complex supply chains and delays in them. So it's a really interesting high dimensionality issue as part of this. And again, it's quite clear actually where the challenge lies in this net zero framework. If you look at transport, a conventional car has about 75 kilograms per vehicle of minerals, where an electric car has in excess of 200 kilograms per vehicle. And you can already see from the colours of the graph here, some of these minerals, the diversity of that. You then also think about the renewables and the low carbon power generation that we're going to need. Offshore wind, has in excess of 15,000 kilograms per megawatt. Of minerals required. Solar PV, again, very different, about 7,500 kilograms per megawatt. So there's a very, the critical minerals are going to be incredibly important in that clean energy transition. And I'm probably not telling this audience anything they don't really know. But this is the big context of the issue now, and I'll issue the challenge that comes from this sort of thinking, a little bit in a few seconds, and I'll open for questions. And those demands are not going to get smaller; they're going to get bigger in the future. And we've seen the volatility in some of the mineral in some of the mineral markets recently, around that, with lithium increasing very heavily. And you can see there's going to be a great demand, on whatever scenario, up to, in some senses, predicted to be 4 times the demand of today, if not more, with a very changing pattern as well, that usage, depending on what you believe the technology portfolio is going to look like in the future. The demand on that technology portfolio will be, will we develop out of criticality? Yes, we will. Will we develop quickly enough? Who knows? I think that's an interesting question to debate. So what did the UK government do as part of our net zero strategy that we put up around COP26? We made a few commitments. One was that we're putting a critical minerals strategy together with a few people who are on this call. We've convened a critical minerals expert group, as you've already heard, to help us advise on that. And we'll be launching shortly a critical minerals intelligence centre, because one of these things is that this is a dynamic, not a static problem. You can't say it's not set and forget strategy time. I mean, that criticality assessment that I already showed you, which is a little over a year old, is already out of date. Things geopolitically, things have changed, supply chains have changed, COVID has changed. It's no longer, if you took a picture of it, it's useless, because in fact it's all changed. So that dynamic nature of the problem is absolutely critical to do that. So the question is, what can you actually do? And I think, I think the challenge that I would lay out to anybody, I'm a scientist supporting the policy development here within the UK government, and the question I ask anybody when they tell me, I know what the problem statement is, I've just told you the problem statement. I think everybody on this call knows the problem statement. The question is, what should governments be doing, and what should the UK government be doing? And we've split it into these sort of buckets to think about what can we do domestically. What are the potentials in the circular economy around that? There's clearly an international context to this, with both trade agreements and collaboration. This conference is very much about ESG and the just transition as part of that, holding up those standards, supporting that just transition, and using standards to drive changes in mining and mineral extraction and refine the whole supply chain, the whole value chain, sorry, is actually quite important. This is a sector that will be enabled digitally back to semiconductors, data and critical minerals. Data and digital is a very important part of this as well as potentially thinking about international context and things that are new. So this is a very high level framing of, in some senses, of what we're looking to think about in the critical minerals strategy, and we welcome discourse and ideas and conversation about how to form that into a proper set of options to deliver outcomes and not another problem statement on critical minerals. So that's my very, very brief talk. I think Sarah, you want to give some time for some sort of questions. Here are my 3 take-home messages. Net zero is a really pervasive challenge. It actually runs through everything that we do. You need that systems approach to think about it. You need to incorporate that behavior change as part of it as people, but also you've got to think about that change being sustainable and that change being resilient. So it is a systems approach that is sustainable, resilient. Critical minerals are a key element, and the UK government is keen to think about how it can work with industry and other stakeholders across the piece. I've just written the word industry here as a coverall to think about, what is the role of government in this? What is the solution space that we can work with people in? I'm a science advisor, so I tend to look at it through the science lens, which is an important element of this, but clearly not all of it. So thank you very much, and if you're interested, you can also follow me on Twitter, where I sometimes tweet about critical minerals. It's my personal KPI as CSA is to get more Twitter followers. I'm not doing very well, but nonetheless, thank you, Sarah. Hopefully we can that was useful and can stimulate some questions from the audience or your panel.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much, Paul. Everybody, please, round of applause for the fabulous Paul Buggs. And now go and make sure you find him on Twitter, just so that we can help you with that KPI there, Paul.
It's a personal KPI.
Excellent. So Paul, just with that, and I've got there are a number of questions that are coming in right this second. So one of them talks straight to the deep sea mining that, of course, was in that last column with regards to sort of kind of part of the framework with regards to the strategy that's being put together. There's been quite a lot of discussion about deep sea mining in this forum over the course of the last week. I don't know if you want to say anything more about that.
Well, I mean, I think we're interested in trying to understand from a scientific basis. I'm interested to understand what the risks, what the opportunities are, what the risks are. And I think one of the challenges often, in this minerals area in general, what are the governance structures that can protect that, particularly in the international domain? So I think that's one of the clear challenges that are coming out here. How can we build the sort of frameworks that help us understand the risks and opportunities around that and not become overwhelmed, particularly in the international context, by just people, in inverted commas, just doing it, close inverted commas, and we end up with the same problems that we've generated historically in the mining industry, now repeated on the seabed. That would be my take on it.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Paul. And then I guess building on that and bringing in your systems of a systems, I think was systems to the power of 6, I think was where we were going with that, just to cheat on that particular tongue twister. So as the person who has been corralling these people, or basically the expert advisory committee that's been feeding into the strategy and everything, and you've done a fantastic job of corralling lots of people with very different ideas. Do you want to just sort of comment on that process and just the sheer magnitude of the different perspectives, the different disciplines, the different aspects that need to come together?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting sort of question. I mean, I think when you start off on the critical minerals journey, in inverted commas, you think it's all about primary production and mining, close inverted commas. I think, I mean, there'll be many people on this call going, yeah, that's a really obvious comment, because, but it isn't to people who are external. It looks like a primary production problem, but it isn't a primary production problem, as you well know. It's one that crosses the whole of the value chain. And then, on it are ESG type considerations as well. And I think mapping out that interconnections. So if I've got a systems problem with my energy transition, there's a systems problem in the way that we use minerals, and the supply chain, and where that's owned, and how we value that, as well as the environmental pressures that are being put on mineral extraction in different countries and different geographies. So actually, you realize that it's not a problem that can be solved even by just pumping cash in it. So actually, this is not a sector, frankly, that is cash poor. I mean, it is actually well financed, and there's quite a lot of money to finance it. So distinct from many other sectors, it's not one that goes out and asks for a lot of money, and that's an interesting sort of context in this as well. So I think corralling the range of understanding, from the academic understanding to the major mineral extractors, to the ESG, to the just transition, to the national and regional and international context of this, to many people that work cross jurisdiction, across the whole value chain of extraction, refining, supply, recycle, gives you that kind of very large landscape in which you have to work this system, which is also then interfaced with the industrial system it feeds as well. And one of the things that I often wonder is whether the net zero challenge will lead to greater vertical integration in that system, which is in some senses not a particularly well integrated system at the moment.
So Paul, just with that as well, then you mentioned that the sector is cash rich, or there's lots of money in it, but and obviously, I mean, with regards to the UK, we are a finance hub for lots of minerals and mining around the world, but an awful lot of that finance is going to gold rather than, say, the critical minerals and materials. I don't know if you've done that split, and if there's anything within that, because of course finance wasn't a discrete bucket within that slide that you showed us at the moment.
I think it's one of the areas that we're currently exploring, actually, to think a little bit about how that sector is financed. I mean, you would wonder, wouldn't you, with some of the prices that's gone up recently in the London Metal Exchange around some of the metals, around the lithium pricing recently, which is increased substantially, whether and that looks to be the long-term maintenance. You look at any of the mineral predictions, there's going to be there's not going to be enough supply to meet the demand, and that's it's economics 101, what happens at that sort of stage as well. So I think there's an interesting question about whether the investment will then follow what is clearly going to be a growth market for a number of years. And there's some very interesting contradictions. A lot of this is not sometimes about primary production, it's about the time it takes to put in a refinery capability, which has a capital and a time lag to meet a demand. So we know in the UK, what we're predicting, the sort of battery usage that we're going to need by 2030, and you can work that all the way back down the supply chain to the raw materials that you're going to need to do that, and it's substantial, and we're not the only ones doing that. Of course, it's been done globally, so you can see that. So back to the finance question, I think you'll see the money follow the market, won't you? To where that's what I'm not again an economist, I'm a scientist, but one would imagine that's the way that it works.
Great.
Maybe
Thanks,
it's somebody who knows more about it could tell us.
Stuart, you've had your hand up. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think I also find it fascinating, this whole conversation of what is the critical mineral. And I realize I'm about to sound like an apologist for the coal industry, and I'm not, but I'll say it anyway. As we go into this next evolution of society and how we change the way we look at energy, you think about a windmill, one of these huge windmills, how much steel is involved in building that windmill? Yes, there's a ton of rare earths in it as well, lots of copper, but a lot of steel. And where's that steel going to come from? So coming back to Pauline's comment, if we think about systems and systems and systems, if we are constantly pushing some of these dirty industries that we need into other places, are we really true to what we're trying to achieve? Or actually accepting that the UK needs steel-making coal to make steel, why not have a steel-making coal mine in the UK rather than pushing it somewhere else, in someone else's back garden? So I think it's understanding this is not just about the sexy element to the bottom of the periodic table. There are a whole bunch of things that are really important here that we need to build this next cultural journey we're on.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Stuart. And in a way, yeah, I when I write all my documents, I write CM, which I interchangeably use for critical minerals and critical materials. And the point that you make is that virtual materials are critical to this. I mean, I think on the steel question in particular, my view is there's a great pressure to decarbonize that industry. It's one of the most difficult to decarbonize industries. There are now production plants at decent scale coming on that are producing green steel. You know, I see hydrogen, you know, and hydrogen-based technologies, you know, beginning to replace, you know, not quite at the scale that's required yet, coal. I think you'll see steel decarbonize. It is a challenge, undoubtedly, but I think that the pressure not to then say, well, actually, we need the steel. It's part of the critical transition. It can hold it up. Let's stop decarbonizing. Let's stop decarbonizing steel because we need it. In my mind, is the wrong. I don't think that's what you suggested, by the way. I don't think it's the right argument. The pressure has to be kept up on steel in order to decarbonize. And I think the offshoring of emissions is interesting. I mean, that's a big push in the COP process under the Scope 3 emissions to stop that offshoring of emissions. And that comes then to emission trading schemes, and the role of emission trading schemes are putting the pressure on the carbon price to stop the offshoring of that. And if you import high carbon steel, high carbon embedded steel, you pay the price for it. So the pressure is there to use the decarbonized product. So I do see the dial being changed. I think the question is how quickly. The G7 has decarbonization of steel as one of its key goals, you know, across that partnership, and that was pushed very heavily at COP26 as well. So I see the argument I would use is, you know, let's not take our foot off the pedal on this. We're going to need to decarbonize steel. It's such a critical building material. Let's make sure that the markets respond to that need for decarbonization that drives the industrial change that's going to be required. But I work on the more sciencey side of stuff, which is sometimes I don't want to come across as too idealistic.
Well, totally agree. We need to move away from coal. Blue hydrogen would be wonderful when it comes. Or green hydrogen.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. Paul, I know that you need to go. Do you have time for one more question, or do you need
time for one more question? Yes.
Excellent. So Miguel, I just wanted to pull you in on this. So coming from Peru, and so therefore one of the main producers of copper. And so therefore, I mean, do you have any thoughts just to share with Paul as a country that is one of those producers selling that copper to, say, the UK, for the UK to then do something with? Do you have any comments with regards to some of what Paul has said? Are there any things you'd like the UK to do for you?
No, yes, I think that the copper is very important in the next new transition of the energy in the world, no? And in the case of Peru, now have a portfolio of projects. 60% of this is in relation to copper, no? And obviously we need to work very hard to make this project and generate the opportunity to give all the world the copper. But the other point is around to the possibility to reduction of the CO2 in the not in the operation, in the sourcing, in the sourcing that is necessary for the operation mine, no? We participate in one study of the International Development Bank, for example, that defined that the scope 3 of the mining operation in South America, in Chile, Peru, and Colombia, is very challenges that we need to work in this reduction of CO2, and the possibility, for example, that the authorities promoting that the companies to report in this, no? The big challenge is how the companies report. The scope 1 and scope 2 is now the companies work very hard, no, because scope 1 is in the operation, and scope 2 is the energy and some products that we need to operation. But the scope 3 is is the suppliers, no? And the suppliers is a big group that we need to work very hard to reduce the emission of CO2, no? And the other topic that is very important in this matter is the neo-sharing, no? With how to obtain the products for the operation near of the mines, no? And this is very interesting in my opinion, because the idea is how to obtain the products near of the mines, probably generate opportunity in the countries to build in this product in the countries, no? And we existed the possibility that the working very hard in the new equipment, no? The artificial miners, no? The mining 4.0, no? That now mentioned this is that we need electro equipment. We need a mining circular, for example. Now topic about the circular economy, but why not talk about the circular miner, no? Mining. It's very interesting, the topic, no? I think that we need to work very hard. We need to promote that the authorities in this country, in Chile, Peru, and in other countries, implementing the incentives that the companies reporting and working very hard with the suppliers to reduce these emissions.
I mean, I think that's really interesting, Miguel. I think the whole, looking at the Scope 3 emissions, I think that the thing that you said about it creating jobs as well, I think the green transition creates jobs as it changes supply chains and makes it more indigenous, and you understand where the carbon is in that supply chain. And I think people are going to, I said digital is a great enabler in this. I'm going to use the blockchain word, but I think we will be tracking through both the minerals and their sources and where, but I think we'll also be looking at where the emissions are embedded and passing that along as well. And I think there's great opportunity for many countries in the green transition about upping the skilled economy to meet the demands of decarbonising locally rather than more globally. So I think mining 4.0 and embracing some of the elements of industry 4.0 definitely is a way towards that in this sort of area. So I think that's a very kind of upbeat message to think about it, because mining and minerals are going to be a critical part of the decarbonisation, and I think there's again a little bit sometimes where people want to bury their heads in the sand about that, and it's which is another mineral, isn't it? But I think we should avoid that absolutely.
So before Paul buries him too deep in that sand, thank you so much, Paul. Absolutely brilliant as always. Thank you very much. Round of applause.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Cheers.
Brilliant, thank you. Fantastic. And that then takes us on to our last formal speaking slot of the day, the fantastic Christopher Reeves. Christopher, welcome to the stage. I will let you introduce yourself, because I know that you wear many hats, and so you can introduce yourself with whichever hats you would like on your head at this particular point in time. But everyone, please put your hands together for the fabulous Christopher Reeves. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And I'd say I'm debating which hat to go for, because I have the experience of having been the sort of the project delivery person, sort of sitting out at the site. I've been the investor, I've been the asset manager, and I've been the consultant advisor. And I've also been sitting on the advisory and the technical, and I've been the person doing the biodiversity survey stuff, sitting there with the lions jumping at you. So all I can say is many thanks. It's a pleasure to be with you all, and opportunity to present some more perspective to some fascinating insights coming through today. And I think actually just picking up on something that Paul just mentioned there around sort of the opportunity for jobs coming out of this green transition, along with several others, I think it was helpful just to define what just transition was and look at the heritage for it, which actually comes from the trades unions' involvement in the COP21 Paris summit, which was following a few months after the signing of the UN SDGs in 2015, where the unions were talking about, well, what are the workforce implications of climate change? So the UN actually put it as being a just transition is an integrated approach to sustainable development that brings social progress, environmental protection, and economic success into a framework of democratic governance and institutional resilience. So I think they were covering most of their bases in that one, but it's a good sort of summary of effectively it's not just the sort of human, it's got the link through to the economic transition. And to my experience, having seen mining trucks returning to camp from community engagement exercises with steel bars sticking through their bodywork, I can attest to the evidence that getting this wrong has very real consequences. And so in short, I would say that climate action plus social inclusion equals the just transition. So in my talk, I'd like to help sort of turn the narrative of ESG and just transition into some practical commercial action for real sustainable growth. And mining and resources have been discussed numerous times as a source of economic growth. And my experience of this has been covering the whole value chain from greenfield sites to buildings and infrastructure. I have just finished being the head of responsible investment for an infrastructure investor. And investors are looking for the development of sustainable asset classes and resilient returns. And I've seen a growing realization that the key role of raw materials is both a source of economic value and risk mitigation, but also one for innovation in buildings materials. I was in Cambridge the other day hearing about the sort of wonders of putting sunscreen on buildings using titanium dioxide as a way to actually sort of extract emissions from the atmosphere, where there's some fascinating research going on there in the Centre for Climate Repair. So if I look at where sort of population growth and material consumption of cities continues to grow, emerging economies in Africa and Asia are dominating the demand for raw materials and infrastructure. And sitting in London, I have to remind myself that the just transition also has a much greater weight in some economies more than others. And what we're seeing at the moment is a number of tensions along that full supply chain. On the supply side, the Sunday Times here in the UK ran an article the other day called "Who Owns the Earth?", which is a sort of suitably dramatic picture with sort of, should we say, concerns about the role of China in the extraction process of metals and minerals. But again, equally on the demand side, we have our own delightful Nigel Farage, who is calling for a referendum on net zero, saying it sort of causes a whole misappropriation of funds, it's uneconomic, and it's a waste of public money. So he likes a good bit of drama. But equally within the supply chain, we are also addressing the circular economy with debate on e-waste, reuse, recycling, and whether this can really be entirely 100% in a growing economy. So the challenge we have is actually a free rider effect and a market failure. For those who benefit from resources, goods, or services don't contribute to the costs. And this is actually a very huge economic opportunity from the energy transition and the green transition to both reallocate around 147 trillion of capital that we have at the moment and around about 300 trillion of new investment needed for low carbon energy and infrastructure. So the pandemic has changed many perceptions of the social agenda, and we are as well as sort of draining the sort of the public finances, this is actually going to greater focus on what sort of economic models countries are wanting to adhere to as they rebuild. And as alluded to several times, the COP26 agenda was to unlock private capital to deliver the sustainable future. And to deliver on this, investors are needing to understand their underlying asset detail. And that's both listed and private equity. Investors do like it simple, though. Can I invest or not? And for good or ill, the simplification of issues around mining has created challenges for the sector. The nuances of sustainability at an asset level create an added lens for screening, selection, and due diligence to agree the valuation and discounts that apply to businesses and its assets. And in the past, I have seen standard screening document could include, is there an issue with water, as a question. However, the recognition that the answer is, it depends, has created a challenge for describing value and discounts in the underlying asset data. And that question then moves into one of being around whether the data is for performance, value enhancement, or reporting, each of which mean a slightly different approach. And how is this relevant to market valuation is something that the market frameworks, such as the emerging International Sustainability Standards Board, the ISSB, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, TCFD, and the emerging TNFD, the Task Force on Nature-Based Financial Disclosure, are all looking at frameworks for how to address it. And so the topic of water, and by extension other natural capital, is highly relevant, as it has multiple ways to assess value to business, society, the planet, and how to cost it. So the energy trilemma for secure, affordable, sustainable energy remains at the heart of the energy transition. And the important role of mined metals and minerals as a core enabler of this has only really started to capture the public mind. Not least has been the recent sanctions around Russia and the appreciation of the role of certain critical minerals, where they come from around the world, at a time when individual electricity bills are rising, and discussing on where and how we can develop more low carbon energy. Whether it's for platinum for fuel cells, low carbon steel for wind turbines, copper for electric motors, or a host of battery minerals for storage, the trajectory is clear, even if the choice of energy vector is mixed. So in his recent TED Talk interview, Elon Musk talked about the need for 300 terawatt hours of energy storage to cover transport, energy, and buildings. Now, this is over 1,000 times more than current capacity. So taking the electric vehicles part of this, Bloomberg's New Energy Group put this research as being somewhere between 116 and 278 billion market by 2030. And this week, the UK's Green Finance Institute put out a report saying that that is around about a 24 billion opportunity to the UK alone annually. Why does that matter for mining? Well, the raw material content, as you've seen, and tonnage, that actually means about 35% of the value of the battery, which in turn is around 30 to 40% of the car's value. So looking to the wider impact of energy in buildings, there's an even more to go for at a time when efficiency in the built environment is as important as building the new bright and shiny new world, because a lot of the assets that are going to be around in 2050, they're already here. So the social lens can easily be recognized in the need for minerals to support health and welfare and urban air pollution at a time of greater urbanization. And this has actually been a great focus and it's been seen as a driver behind a lot of China's investments into battery technology. Not only do they not have an oil industry, but the recognition where clean energy technologies and the reduction of pollution supports healthier population and mitigates the cost of the healthcare system. So at a time of the debate on raw materials grows, there's increasing evidence and support for the greater use of nature-based solutions as part of our net zero ambitions. And here the role of mining as a steward of the land under management is equally important. And the role of business to work with communities, livelihoods, and ecosystems around operations is an enormous opportunity. So reading comments in this year's Mining Indaba from, I think it was the session yesterday morning, the concerns from government on high inflation, supply chain, fiscal debt, all add to the long-held concerns of greater resource nationalism. So unless companies can balance those financial and technology investment opportunities with their perceptions of value creation alongside citizen benefit, need to be addressed. So where can we act? Well, Deutsche Bank helpfully ran a study of nearly 2,000 businesses over 18 countries over 14 years over where ESG factors impact portfolio risk. And this study confirmed that out of all the pillars of ESG, the social pillar significantly reduces all types of risk, and that managing the social dimension is the most effective way of managing corporate risk. And the study also concluded that managing social matters was the only one of the ESG factors to reduce systematic risk. So with the commercial pull for raw materials and the realization of the importance of metals and minerals in the mining sector, because the mining sector owns the data on the ground, and it has a role to help adjust the valuations to recognize these uncosted externalities, which are currently getting a free rider effect in the economic system. So what can you do to affect on this? Earlier today, Manuel Pulgar-Vidal gave you 7 areas for action. I will try and cut it down to 5. Investment strategy. What is your exposure? Can you reframe your finance with KPIs to support the just transition and give improved cost of capital, recognizing the de-risking nature of social issues being managed effectively? Engagement. How evolved and up-to-date is your stakeholder engagement, and what is your understanding of what they consider just? Capital allocation. Has your portfolio and operations really been tested at the boundaries of your risk tolerance for social issues? Policy advocacy and partnerships. Do the people influencing your business know what you do and the value that you bring, and what can you learn from places where they do things differently? And then learning and review. How to inform and learn at every level in the organization. So in conclusion, with all the lack of clarity on metrics and the debate on data around where to start to make a difference, I'm reminded of the poem, The Station, by Robert J. Hastings, on the dangers of waiting for the idyllic outcome. So when looking to the challenge of delivering a just transition for many leaders faced with the choices, it is regret over the past and fear of the future that is creating inactivity in the present. So I remain a stubborn optimist for the future. And as it says in the poem, the journey is the joy, relish the moment. Or in other words, let's get on with it. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Christopher. Fantastic. Round of applause. Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Christopher, and also leaving us with those wise words of wisdom in terms of just to get on with it. Yes, of course, the future is scary. The future is always scary, but we can't just sit here and do nothing, because actually by doing nothing, the future is going to come and snap us in the arse anyway. So with regards to that, if people have got questions for Christopher, please do feel free to pop them into the chat or send them in, because we're going to go straight into a broader panel session very, very shortly. So Val, if you're there, if you want to be turning on your camera now, just so that we know that you are ready to go. But Christopher, just before we go into that, from your perspective, I mean, so you've worked not just within mining, but obviously broader sectors for a number of years. Have you seen progressive change? I mean, are people taking ESG more seriously now, or is it just a case that for example, the investors are now focusing on it more heavily? So if we focus in on the mining aspects, are the practices actually changing, or is it just that there's a bigger spotlight that's focusing in on them?
I think that there is such a diverse set of investor audiences out there who are, some of them are still moving away into the realm of do no harm. Still just sort of working out, try not to kill people. So you have then this sort of world of integrated ESG, where there is a much greater acceptance, as we've seen by the inflow of money into ESG ETFs and funds and investments, to say, if you are addressing these in a meaningful manner, you don't have to go and say you're a tree hugger. You don't have to say you're focusing on one particular issue, but managing this stuff properly over a meaningful lifespan of the entire asset does reduce volatility. It does reduce more reliable returns. It may not be the superior short-term returns that you might have had in the past, but it does give you better business performance. And frankly, also, one of the bits which is helping on the investment side is the exit values are improved, and people want to work for you, because the employment side is really important, because people are fighting the millennials and people who are coming through with a much greater planetary awareness, with a much greater influence from social media around how you are making an impact on other people, whether it's mental health or whether it's through to planetary impact. People are thinking, well, where do I want to work? The career for life in one organization is no longer the same. So the investor world is having to address it. It is diverse. European Union regulations are going right down to asset level disclosure, and it is forcing that sort of change in allocation. And the challenge of, is it real change you're making? The discussion of greenwash. Well, last year, one of the large funds from Germany got fined 160 million for putting statements out saying we're a sustainable fund. And the regulator turned around and said, no, you're not. Please pay up a fine. That's false marketing. So there's a realization that you actually, if you say you're going to do something, you really come up with the evidence to do it. So as well as that, you have this government agenda where the net zero biodiversity positive TCFD alignment has been an incremental sort of push on expectations. So I think mining has always been doing a lot to sort of address the issue, but do the investors quite get the language? There's still a translation issue between the two, I believe, to actually sort of understand that sort of value of, you've got thousands of acres of land under your management, but you're trying to do as much as you can, but they're only interested, as someone talked about earlier, on the avatar effect. What's the quarterly performance statement look like? And you have to say, but I've got all this other stuff which is uncosted. So how to go and explain that in investment language is starting to come. And some investment teams have significant ESG teams who are experienced in this. People, I won't name particular ones, but they've got up to sort of 20 or 30 big funds doing it. And so the conversation with PRI and responsible investor groups is largely around secondary investment, not primary. And the problem I've had with talking to the UN and dealing with PRI submissions, it's great when you have the asset, but you've actually got all the embedded risk already to go and consider. And the sort of review process that goes into that PRI assessment of how did the asset get to being an operational asset is often not incorporated in that discussion. And that's where there's the investors, The accreditations, the ratings agencies, the certification processes are starting to evolve, and they're all evolving from slightly different bases. So your discussion on different molecules, you're starting up, CO2 has got the easy one at the moment because it's quite common around the world. H2O will get it next. And then we got molecules and electrons are going to get sort of targeted next. So we have molecular sort of warfare on sort of regulations coming through. But I suspect that sort of the tough stuff on stakeholder engagement, there's a bit of a bun fight between the GRI and SASB. But what's clear is the level of materiality of why does it matter financially is getting people to focus. And the ISB and all of these future financial directions are coming to say, what sort of business are you developing? What sort of business are you trying to grow? What's your governance? What's your strategy? What's your metrics? What's your targets? That is where all of those regulations are going. And that's where investors have been asking this for years. So companies are saying, oh, I probably ought to go and tell a better story, because that actually is what the investors want to go and manage their risk. So it is changing. It's a little slow, but the appetite is there. People just need to know why it makes a difference. What's the commercial upside? The point made earlier about, is it a premium? No. Will you get less of a discount? Yes. Will you get improved cost of capital? Potentially, yes.
So with this, Christopher, because I mean, a lot of the discussion this week has been about, do we have the right business model? And the kind of almost, I think the agreement with regards to this particular community being probably not, but that's a really difficult thing to change. And so this need to actually say, right, so we're doing really good things with regards to ESG, but to get any credit for it, I have to translate it into a commercial value. It's quite painful for somebody who's not on that commercial side. Do we have to keep doing that for the moment, or can we change this business model that actually takes into account more of that social capital, natural capital, etc., rather than just translating it into that financial capital?
There's a reframing of finance here. I mean, there was building a tailings dam I was working on a couple of years ago, where we were saying, well, how do you deal with the compensation payments for the community? And you could either take it as being, oh, it's a cost, we've got to pay it. Or you can say, no, you have an unfair cost of capital. You have an advantage view because your return on that money that you're putting into the community is not a financial return. So you can reframe your business as being a venture capitalist by investing into a community, by creating a new industry, which gives new livelihoods, which gives a new economy to the community. So by reframing how the business model works around some of these things, you can actually come up with something that is different and actually then plays to the mindset of the investors. So in this case, we were looking at building plantations so you can create a livelihood. You can bring in a skill set as an international miner that gives access to international markets that the local community does not. So the joys of the internet means you can just chuck an internet trading hub in the middle of a village with some good quality control mechanisms in there. And that trading mechanism that how it works, but the community have never seen before, maybe. Although they're remarkably good with WhatsApp groups to tell you what's going on before you know it. So they can set up this sort of community trading, which gives a nice little thing which you can actually introduce. So the venture capital approach to sort of a lot of mining spend means that you can just reframe that.
So with that then, Christopher, I mean, so you could reframe that. So taking that tailings dam example, for example, and reframing it so that mining's more of that venture capital or kind of, investing in the development of a place. Why stop at the tailings and why not go for the full whack? And actually one part of the value of that, being a steward of that part of that patch of earth, actually that just happens to be one mechanism through which you generate value for that point in time. Why? And just with that as well, if we did spin it to say, actually, no, we are social developers, etc., does that then mean that we cut off some of those existing sources of capital because they decide, actually, no, we don't want you anymore, but unlocks different opportunities for raising finance?
I think you can certainly unlock different types of finance, and you can potentially de-risk your projects, because sometimes you can bring in philanthropic capital who has a very different model, because you can end up sort of doing something which is social benefit. And I know a lot of large mining companies do this, where you bring in foundations, you bring in social development engines, you bring in sort of research agencies who are saying, I would love to have access to X bit of land. I would love to have a project to work on to do stuff. And you're thinking, well, that's outside my fiduciary duty as a corporate to deliver responsible commercial returns. But this organization can come in where their return on capital is very different. They don't have to make 10%. They're there with sort of a philanthropic agenda to sort of say, well, look, we need to go and focus on, is the soil quality better in the future, or is the biodiversity mitigation better? And you can bring things in. Citizen science is equally good. You can open up an awful lot on that. I've worked with a DNA-based sort of biodiversity management company, and they're sort of looking at how do you take sort of citizen science out, so you get the communities around there to say, right, you go out and test for what's in the community around it. You tell us what you think's there. And then it's a bit part of the disclosure and transparency model, which can help your license to operate by bringing new people in.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that, Christopher. Absolutely fabulous, as always. And pleasure. Thank you for the poetry and elevating our cultural level for this afternoon. Massive.
I very nearly went for the Demosthenes, but I thought that'd probably be a little bit too far. But as he's all about oratory, and he was saying the three things about oratory is about action, action, and action. And that's why I'm slightly favoring in-person meetings, because you can actually do actions of body and be a bit more Italian in your language, sort of be a bit more physical and engage people. Exactly. So.
You just have to watch out that you might hit a wall.
Don't worry. I was reminded by various meetings with the infamous Paul Gate when he was at Bernstein. And prior to that, at your old alum, who used to bring in an awful lot of Kierkegaard and various utilitarian thoughts and philosophy messages into COP evaluations, which I thought was always a good way to go and challenge the meetings.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Christopher. Everybody, round of applause for the fantastic Christopher Reeves. Brilliant. Cool. So now, wink on the recording side, moving on to the final panel session. There are some hilarious messages going on behind the scenes, by the way, in terms of when to start and stop various different bits of recordings. What we're going to go into now is we're bringing back all of our fantastic speakers who are still with us this afternoon, not because they've passed away or anything like that, but because you've still been kind enough to stick with us on the main screen here. And first, I'd just like to bring Val to the fore. So Val, do you want to reintroduce yourself? And then perhaps just share with us, are there any kind of salient points that have really resonated with you this afternoon? Or do you think there's something that we've missed? So Val, let's come to yourself first. And then we will just quickly move around the room to get everybody else's just salient points that they've registered.
Yes, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Valerie Malte. I am the Corporate Environmental Manager at Core Mining. I essentially started my career in mining in 1983. Joking just because I come from a mining community and my father's an underground miner, and I studied in the Sudbury mining camp, grew up in Timmins. And so a lot of what I heard today resonated with me. I think when we talk about what's changed since, for example, I was a kid growing up within the mining community, and where we are today as an industry and what we're talking about are certainly not things that were discussed even, and I was certainly not aware of. That community engagement piece is something that, despite growing up in a mining community that paid for all of my social activities as a kid, I really did not know what they did outside of what my dad did and what I heard at the dining room table. So I appreciate everybody's points and presentations. A few things stood out to me in terms of themes. I think the collaboration piece is so essential. I really liked the illustration of the system, and maybe it's just because that's something that I'm working very hard on right now within our company, is like developing systems. But I think by illustrating the system, that's where we could start to take a step back and identify those opportunities for shared value, which I think is the other theme that everybody mentioned or touched on throughout the afternoon here. So and that's of course where we need to go, and I think that's what we're all here to try to find a solution to get towards. The other thing that really stood out to me was the time piece. So everybody touched on that in a different way. For me, within my role at Core Mining, time, we put it into the context of, we identify a project, we have to study it, we permit it, we develop it, and we close it. And thank you, Stewart, for mentioning closure. You don't often hear a geologist bring closure to the table. especially an exploration geologist. So I appreciate that. But the time piece is really important in this discussion, not only from a decarbonization standpoint, but when we talk about the investment community. And when we look at the mining industry, it takes a very long time to get that financial return. And I think that proper engagement with the financial community is a critical piece in terms of making sure that we're not forced into rushing our relationships on the ground with our Indigenous populations, with our communities, because that puts us all in an impossible position to deliver, to meet anybody's expectations. And we all know that a bad quarterly statement is probably the worst thing that we can do to continue maintaining that positive relationship with the investment community. And we do need that positive relationship, because that's what funds our activities. So and the decarbonization piece from a time perspective is absolutely critical, because we don't have all of the logical solutions at our fingertips right now to be able to be net zero, to take that mineral out of the earth and send it to the various places that utilize those critical minerals downstream. And so we all need to be aware of that. And I appreciate that, Christopher, you're an optimist. I'm an enthusiast. So, and I think that everybody at this table, or that, pursues a career in this realm, has to have some element of those character traits. But I think that we need to continue to identify various solutions. So we approach it at CORE multi-pronged. We can't just have one solution. We have to have everybody at the table collaborating to bring their piece to the table, because every piece may or may not have a significant contribution to reducing that emission. But I think that, going back to those non-quantifiable pieces, we still need to consider those ideas. So, and I think the last piece, not to take up too much time, is the piece about uncertainty. So we have scope 3 as part of this discussion. And I think that is an obstacle that we all need to come to the table and have a real discussion about, in order to ensure that the totals, or whatever we are disclosing, is of significant importance. Because, going back to the scores that we were talking about in the first presentation, thank you, Michael, for that. We don't want to be focusing on chasing the wrong things and deploying resources to things that are not going to have a material impact. And so, yeah, those were my observations. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be a part of this discussion.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Val. Absolutely brilliant and very enthusiastic. Brilliant. Michael, perhaps if we come across to yourself and just get any salient points from yourself that you think have come out from this afternoon, and then Stewart, let's go across to yourself.
Sure, thank you. I think it's there's been something to draw from every discussion up to this point in time. One thing that I was going to show and I didn't, just sort of at the end of my presentation, and I'll do it now just to highlight some of the points. Here we go.
It's working.
So this is right. So this is a list of, we were talking about materiality, and I think Val just sort of touched on it again here, being important, what's important. And so this is that idiosyncratic part of the ESG ratings that I didn't get to, where we're looking at exposure and how companies are managing their exposure, and then also grading the management. But then here's sort of these are the issues that show up. And these are, I think, from 2016 to 2019, the amount of event tags that affected the mining sector. And you can see emissions, effluents, and waste was far and above the most important. Community relations and labor relations are at a number of the rating agencies lumped together. But you can see those are also significant there. And then it's occupational health and safety, business ethics, and bribery down the list. The ones at the bottom where you see duplicated, got cut off for the slide presentation, but it's in the supply chain. So I think, you know, part of what was going on that Miguel was talking about was very important. The constructing trust aspect of it, and community relations, how important that is, the social license to operate. I thought the points that Manuel made were also along that same lines, and important. The dynamic materiality. So we tend to think of this as being, here are the impacts, and community relations is one of the material issues that is examined, and community emissions, effluents, and waste is another one. But part of that is, and I think Christopher was maybe alluding to this too, is that those are static as far as the assessments go by the financial markets, or at least by the rating agencies. And the financial markets are looking, saying, we need something a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more on the ground and up to date. And so I agree that there is a little bit more, and again, sort of what Stewart was talking to about sending in your community engagement teams. And, you know, I've got another chart where I, you know, sort of have a U-shaped, and it's the financing of a project across the life cycle, with just above the U, there's, you know, the parallel line, or the horizontal line that's a zero. You know, you're in the hole for using your existing cash, and then you go to equity markets and debt markets, get to the bottom, and then you come across at some point in time, 4 or 5 years into the build, and you're now generating a positive return, and so your risk profile changes. And I always use that as an example because it's at the bottom of that U where communities will say, this is the most important place where I can renegotiate the contracts and extract more from the mining company as to what they're going to do for my community. And then you talk to the mining companies and say, that's the worst place to have a conversation with me, because I've already got sunk costs. I'm halfway through the build, and I can't go and change all the stuff that came in behind it. So it was sort of the idea of, if you can tackle this, like Stewart was saying, if you can tackle these things and get them cleared up and identified at the beginning, then yeah, your cost becomes less, and the sooner you are turning the lights on, and the sooner you are back to making money or having the positive impact. And then I think lastly, it just gets to the business model idea, is coming up with a parallel. Right now, everything is dollar based, and that's what we're thinking of. But there's a good argument that we can run potentially and start to develop a parallel valuation, and that is going to be off of carbon. And I think we've had a couple of the speakers address that, saying, you know, how are you valued based off of carbon? The carbon either that you're creating and where it goes through the economy. And this gets into the circular economy. Steel. Stewart asked the question, how many tons of steel in a wind turbine? It's 3,000. And so when you can do a chart and take a look at where wind turbines are going up, and you see large fields in Nevada, for instance, or anywhere, and you go, that's 3,000 tons of steel for each wind turbine. That's huge. So yeah, very much I was a part of the, you know, and did the steel sector as well, and responsible steel, hydrogen steel, green steel. But then it brings up sort of Christopher's page from the Financial Times. China is coal-fired steel making plants, and the urbanization trends there and in Africa are going to continue, and that is going to be interesting to take a look at. Steel we can reuse infinitely in recycling, but yet we don't, and we're still mining it to the extent we are. So yeah, all of them were very good, and all of them I can show you how, when I think about them, related to ESG and finances, but I'll leave that for the discussion. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Michael. Brilliant. Stuart, what about your comments? And then I'll come to Christopher, who I know has his hand up.
It's probably pressing, so we let him go in first, if it's
okay,
relevant.
Yeah, sure. On you go, Christopher.
Too kind, Stuart. So we're just really responding on that piece about dynamic materiality and the sort of challenge that people are facing there. I think to your comment earlier about what has changed, the way that reporting, disclosure, and investors are looking at things, with the reputation looking at forward-looking targets, outcomes, featuring much more heavily in company disclosure, It is interesting when you look at the large asset managers like BlackRock, who invest in satellite technology to go out as part of their portfolio risk management, so they can go and do the monitoring of your assets on a much more real-time basis. So actually, when they go into an active, engaged conversation, they will come to you with their questions about what's happening on the site before you tell them. And I think to that dynamic piece, where a lot of the sort of policies, procedures, and traditional disclosure is on evidence, CDP, this is how much we did disclose. And so, yeah, that's lovely. What are you going to do? That's the evidence to track performance. So where everyone's saying the TCFD world is saying the baseline is you. You tell us where you're trying to get to, and then we'll track you against you. We're not trying to go and set something arbitrary. And that's why a lot of these regulations are getting quite interesting, is because companies are wrestling with, blimey, I'm having to do what I said I was going to do. And so and the asset managers are now saying, well, I need to get ahead of the curve. How do I go and get the ground-based truth to match up with some long-range sensing technology? So some interesting ways to play, where I think that sort of plays to both monitoring, good disclosure, and that dynamic nature.
And I guess with that as well, Christopher, there's the whole, yes, go in and ask the right questions and then follow up on it with action. So if the company doesn't do the right thing or you know, give the right answer, for example, then walk away from them, or, you know, use that stewardship responsibility as an investor and take action.
Investor activism has certainly been big, as we've seen with something like Engine Number One forcing some fairly significant changes at places like Exxon.
Yeah. Stewart, Val's got her hand up. Are you okay for me to go to Val quickly? Yeah, excellent. Val, over to you. Oh, and you've got that mute button on.
I took my hand off. I said apologies to Stewart. Sorry for doing that. But I just needed to chime in there because something really stood out to me from Michael's presentation about the consensus. And there was no consensus. It appeared as though there is consensus for who we know are the bad players. But I wonder if those bad players, quote unquote, are the ones who just don't have the resources to report in to all of these metrics, which it takes a tremendous amount of time to do this. However, on the ground, they're doing the right thing. And so I just don't know how to tie those two together, but I think that it's worth not necessarily saying that we all agree that the people who don't report aren't doing the right thing. Perhaps they're junior companies trying to do the right thing and they need a handout, you know?
Yeah. And I think I agree with you there, Val. I mean, the number of people who come to us and say, look, we've got this amount of money to be able to spend. Do we spend it on reporting or do we spend it on action? And it's so difficult because actually they might not get more money unless they do report, but they're reporting on something that they haven't done because they haven't got, etc. So yeah, I can see that Stuart's now leant into the camera. I'm going to come across to Stewart. We're going to give him his opportunity. On you go, Stewart, and then I will attempt to go to Miguel unless somebody else puts their hand up. On you go, Stewart. Thanks,
Sarah. And for me, one of my sort of informative moments in my life was working in southern Peru, the Ecological project near Moquegua. So I think Miguel's presentation today really talking about how we changed the conversation from this very patriarchal way we used to think about building projects and engaging with communities to actually coming in and being partners and looking for true solutions that will be shared, will create value, actually talks to me a lot. One of the words I have trouble with as a geologist, a scientist, a person working for a mining company is sustainability, because we are an exploitive industry. And I think we often ignore that we are exploiting non-renewable resources. Yet we love to put this banner of sustainability around what we do. And so I think we need to be careful at times that we're not, I think greenwashing was a phrase someone used today, we're not creating this belief that we are wonderfully green, wonderfully sustainable. We are exploiting limited resources. So if we accept that and then understand, as Miguel really well pointed out, how we can turn that into a force for good, not just a big hole in the ground, I think is a really wonderful outcome. And it's actually explaining that well about why we are doing things, how we can create these solutions and enable it. So yeah, great presentation. I think often presentations that I don't understand are the ones that really interest me. So putting the F into ESG, Michael, as a I think someone else said wonderfully, and I'll paraphrase, I'm a scientist, not an economist, which I think is a bit rude to economists. But it's understanding really within the bubble we get into about thinking that it's all about tons and grade, it's all about the ore body stupid, is actually thinking about actually what is the externality around what we're doing and who is going to pay for what we do, who is going to benefit from what we do, and how does the world actually perceive within our bubble what we are doing. And obviously that's where the financial community really comes in to point us in the directions that they think we should be thinking, which is quite often different from what we think is important. So yeah, I really enjoyed today. Lots of really interesting different rabbit holes to burrow down, and yeah, it's been fun.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much, Stuart. Brilliant. Miguel, how about yourself? What do you think?
Oh, I think that is a very interesting day. We talk about the different topics, and I suggest that in my opinion, at the end, the world now is changed, and if all actors not work more collaborating, cooperation with all actors around to any industry, it's difficult to continue development, no? And it's difficult to not obtain the sustainable world and the sustainable activity. We need more collaboration. Why? Because the more collaboration is possible to first generate trust, listen more and talk less, no? And obtain the good environment to it's possible to resolve the needs around to any activity. In the case of mining, and in the case of Peru, in Peru, the mining operation is near to the village, the communities that don't have water, don't have energy, don't have roads. And if these communities and the village wait that the national authorities resolve this, probably 10, 20 or 30 years, and it's not possible to resolve this. We need a collaboration with the principal actors. The idea of the share value, in my opinion, is a innovative idea because it's not a donation, it's not philanthropy, it's how to resolve the needs, but at the same time obtain benefit for the company. No? In the case of mining, for example, the training people, the training at the local suppliers that give service competitiveness, no, is important. Now in the new change in the world, no, the mining 4.0, we need a new technology. It's possible to train in the people, and these people live near of the mining give this service, no? And at the end, in the case of purpose, no, I mentioned the purpose because the purpose, maybe you know, now all companies think about the why exist, no? And if you define the purpose, it's possible to work very hard to obtain this purpose, and this purpose obviously include all the stakeholders. And in my opinion, the best tool to obtain this is a share value strategy. No? And for this reason, I think that thank you for the opportunity to share, and very grateful to participate because the topics that talk during this day is very interesting for all. And now the big challenge is how to talk about this, how to make these ideas in reality, no? in the all countries, in the mining countries. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much, Miguel. And Pauline, just before I come to wrap up, do you have any final words that you want to share with us? She'll find the mute button. It's all good. It's all good. Yeah.
Found it. Yes. There are a few things that I've scribbled things down that I think I would like to speak out. Stuart's kind of provided me a nice link because you were talking about words, and I think words, language, are really important. I know it's not the only part of communication, but it's a very important part. And I think it's the bit when we've talked a lot, haven't we, about interdisciplinary collaboration, and that's what this week has been about. This is the different disciplines coming together and talking, and that's where we're most likely to misunderstand each other, is when we use language, because there's an assumption that, of course, we know what somebody means when they use this word, but in certain contexts, the word can end up meaning something completely different. I was playing around with words a bit when I was thinking about what to say earlier, but it just fell off the end. But one of the little things, because we like these little snippety things, I've got communication builds community. And I came up with discourse needs discussion. That probably needs a bit more thinking about. But one of the speakers, and I think it's possibly the same one that said that they weren't an economist, said something about science, that they were a scientist and not an idealist. And I'm just like, I was absolutely gobsmacked by that, because I'm just like, the whole of science is completely idealistic. Why are we having this conference? Because we want something different. We're seeing that there can be a different way to do things, a different world. We want to solve all these problems and issues that we're talking about. I'm like, is that not what idealism is all about? So I was going to say, really happy for people to think about that. And I think the last thing I would say is that I don't think it's on, when we're talking about a just transition, and this is, you know, one of the questions you've been asking people, what it means to us, I don't think it's idealistic to think that we should pay the real price for what we want. And I just think when it was proved that the coal-fired power stations, the emissions from them were causing acid rain, we paid for flue gas desulfurization equipment to be retrofitted to all the power stations. So this thing about, you know, the coal, I'm like, of course we weren't suggesting that steel should be decarbonized. And I'm like, that's one of those sort of arguments that people use to dismiss something, isn't it? It's like, well, of course we weren't thinking that, but we should. And somebody else, I think it was Stewart, talked about, you know, where is the steel coming from that we're using at the moment? It's China. Is China decarbonizing their steel processes? I don't think so. Whereas we, you know, we could, and I think, you know, we should. If that is the price of having steel, then we should pay the real price for steel.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Pauline. And I'm just quickly looking through my notes, because I think it was on Monday, somebody came out with the most amazing, it wasn't a quote, it just came out of her mouth, which was around nationalisms for accountability's sake. And I think that's something
nationalism for, no, it was self-sufficiency for environmental reasons, not for nationalistic reasons.
There we go. And I think that then points to your point there, Pauline, in terms of actually, no, we can be accountable. We can make sure that those emissions aren't being pumped out, and actually we look after human rights and we do all the rest of it as well. So fantastic. Thank you so much for that. So to all of our fantastic speakers from this session here this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are in the world, a massive, massive, massive thank you. Thank you so much. Absolutely brilliant. Fantastic. Cool. So just in words of closing for today, don't worry, you're almost free to go. Tomorrow morning, UK time, or very, 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 very late tonight for Stewart, and I think he shouldn't join him because it will be the middle of the night for him. We have our final session of this week, so session number 8. During this session tomorrow, we're going to be joined again by a whole host of wonderful people, including individuals who are working in Europe with regards to where the battery materials come from. In fact, we've got again some more of the people downstream of the majority of people that we've talked to over the course of the last week, and really saying, okay, well, where do these materials come from? How do we actually design these batteries, these vehicles, to make use of the most responsible material? What do we have coming through there? So really great discussions will be had tomorrow. But because we're in the kind of the Americas time zone, I just want to say thank you so much to all of you who have engaged in this conference over the past week. Truly, truly brilliant. A massive thank you to, there we go. A massive thank you to absolutely all of you. By the time we get to the end of tomorrow, we will have had more or less, because again, we always sneak in extra people. We will have had approximately 79 speakers with almost an equal split in terms of identified gender, which of course is much more exciting than just two different genders in there. We've had people speak from all over the world, so from the Philippines, Australia, the DRC, Ethiopia, South Africa, Cote d'Ivoire, the UK, France, different parts of Europe, Norway and Sweden, Peru, Canada, the US, etc. So it's been an incredibly diverse conference as well. We've had people who are very supportive of mining. We've had people who really think that mining should never, ever happen. And again, the way that we actually create this discussion and move forwards is by coming into the room and having those conversations, as Pauline was saying, and I think everybody's been echoing here today. With regards to what's happening next for responsible raw materials, go and check out Ludovine's talk that she gave at the beginning of the week. So that gives a little bit of an insight into what we're up to as an organisation. I'll be divulging more tomorrow. However, there are three things that I would like to share with you now. The first is a piece of education that we've been involved with. So Edgermine, which is a Canadian company or part of a Canadian publishing company, they have just launched today ESG in mining. So it's an online learning course. It's an introduction as to what on earth is this thing called ESG in the mining sector. And so do feel free to go and check that out, being run by, as I mentioned, being run by Edgermine. So that's really exciting. And we've been involved in that behind the scenes, haven't we, Rose? So Rose has mostly been involved in that, to be honest. This is all thanks to her making this happen from our end. The second thing to mention is that we will be at PDAC. So in June, those of you who are in the region or maybe trapped in Canada because their visas haven't come through to release them to other places, any of you who are going to be at PDAC, reach out and say hello, because we would love to see you, like face to face, and see the back of your heads and how tall we all are and stuff like that. It will be glorious. And we can, as said earlier on, we can wave our arms around in a very sensible and safe manner. So we'll be at PDAC. And then the final thing, because of course, one of our missions really is to engage with as broad a group of people as possible, is that, and I think this is the coolest thing that, to be honest, has ever happened. And I'm not even the one that's going. The science tent at Glastonbury. Okay, Glastonbury being a really big music festival in the UK. If you haven't heard of it, then we'll stick it into the chat. Okay, so this is like one of the big music festivals. They are taking their science tent and they're putting it right beside the main stage. So it's kind of getting prime position. Okay, so it's getting prime position. And in that tent, there is going to be a section on raw materials. And so that is going to be run by ourselves with the Geological Society. So Rose will be there at Glastonbury, engaging with the masses with regards to why it's so important for us to understand where all our raw materials come from that go into all of the bits and pieces that we have round about us. So really trying to engage with people who might not ordinarily understand or know or care about where all our materials come from. We might also take along some, I don't know, mineral growing kits as well, because that would probably go down quite well with the Glastonbury vibe. So with that, everybody, thank you. A massive, massive thank you to all of you today. And for those of you, depending on your time zone, we will see you at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning for the final session. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Cool. Cheers, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Ciao.
Goodbye. Bye-bye.